I think about this moment when he and I get into a disagreement and immediately stop being mad at him. The idea that I almost lost him and never would have known what happened is enough to calm even my most justified anger. This happened about 3 years ago. I was 24, he was 25. It had pretty much been just me and him since we were 17 and 18. So my whole world was almost snatched away. It was late at night. I had just picked him up from work and we'd stopped at a Harris Teeter for a bottle of wine and a pizza. A couple of details. I had both of our cell phones in my purse because that's just how we did it when we were out together. He didn't like having it in his back pocket. Also, my husband is very pretty. I mean, he's handsome, but he's got long curly black hair and a slight build. And we both look way younger than we are. It made us targets for more than a few weirdos. So we were in line about to pay and he realizes he left his wallet in the car. The store was pretty much empty and there was no one behind us, so he said, "I'll be right back," and ran out into the dark parking lot. Now, I'm anxious anyways, so when he was gone for literally 4 minutes, I ran outside to look for him. I saw a black truck with a trunk cover on it, driving away under the single street light, and my husband nowhere in sight. My knees felt like jelly. I never understood that saying until that moment. I ran to our car hoping that he was there. He was sitting in our locked car, staring after the truck, until I too loudly smacked the passenger window. He looked at me with giant terrified eyes. "Get in," leaned over and unlocked my door and yelled at me to lock it back when I sat down. He was shaking and freaking out and hugging me. I finally just squeezed him and said, "What the heck happened?" He finally just said, "Give me my phone," and he called 911, so I heard the story as he was telling it to the operator, and it still makes me want to throw up when I think about it. He had walked out to the car and noticed the black truck a lane over. We both worked in stores in that shopping center and had never been afraid of the parking lot, but luckily it sent up a red flag and he hurried. As he fumbled with the keys, no fob, he heard the truck start up and figured it was leaving. In the time it took for him to grab his wallet out of the seat and turn around, the truck was behind him, and a big man had opened the trunk. As the man turned around to face him, my husband just fell back in our car and slammed the door. The man didn't try the door right away. Instead, he hit the window in anger, and that's what saved my husband because he managed in that moment to lock the doors. The man just stood there for a whole minute, looking around and tried opening the door twice. Then he paced for a few seconds and went back to the front of his truck and dug around. This whole time my husband sat in horror without his phone. I really wish he'd thought to honk the horn or something to scare the guy or get somebody's attention, but he was too scared to think. Finally, the man just climbed into the cab and sat until, I guess, he saw me running out of the store and zoomed off. The police arrived and my husband gave a description of the truck and the man. Tall, big, white, balding, dressed in all black, like a sweatsuit. The truck either didn't have a license plate or he'd covered it. They didn't find him, that we know of. We since moved out of the state. So that's how my husband was almost kidnapped for what I refuse to imagine. I stayed awake for nights just holding him and feeling him breathe, because I almost lost him. After the shock wore away, he became rather serious about working out because the fact that he wouldn't have been able to fight the man off haunts him. Screw that guy for making my husband a victim. Hi, this is a 2 for the price of 1 post, both occurring in the same house. I'm a girl for those who care. I live in one of the safest areas in the entire world. The location of my old house was no exception. I lived in one of those great neighborhoods that everyone wants to live, and by the time they are married and have kids and whatnot, I felt totally and completely safe. There are only 2 creepy things that happened to my family. First to my mom and then to me when we were living in my old house. That being said, it was the most kick-ass house and neighborhood ever, and creepy/stalker and people didn't deter from that at all. Anyways, the first one happened to my mom. My family and I immigrated from Europe when I was just a baby for my dad's job. My parents didn't speak English very well at all when we first moved, so it was pretty hard on them both. My dad was working out of town, and it was just my mom. my older brother, 3, and me, being a useless 6-month-old, home for the weekend alone. Apparently this is where it gets to be like the movie The Strangers. Somebody rang the doorbell at 3 in the morning, obviously waking my mom up. At first, she thought that maybe my dad had come back early from his trip and forgotten his keys, which happens way more often than you would think. She goes to the door. "Hello?" A woman's voice replied, and it's very soft but urgent sounding. "I need to talk to Stacy." My mom, in her broken English, tried to tell her that Stacy didn't live here, and apparently the woman kept insisting that she did, but in a voice that was very creepily calm and soft. My mom never opened the door, but this lady came back 2 more times that night, ringing the doorbell asking the same thing over and over again. "I need to talk to Stacy." Fast forward 13 years. I'm a sassy 13-year-old living in the same house. My house had a huge back porch that everyone used to come and hang out on. The porch was wooden and surrounding it was a pretty tall railing, built that way on purpose because my entire family is really tall. Thus, it's very easy for somebody to stand on the railing and get onto the shortest part of our roof and shimmy up the big window on that roof section. Read my window. Well, one night, I was reading like a badass past my bedtime, so maybe 10:30, with my dog Hades lying on my bed. Hades was the most loving, wonderful yellow lab that anyone could ever have. He was so friendly to everyone, and the only time he would ever bark was if somebody rang our doorbell or knocked or whatever. So I just shut off the lights and stopped reading. Probably Harry Potter, and I began to toss and turn. Suddenly, I feel Hades move, and I look. And his gaze is directed toward my window. Side note, that's the thing I hate the most about animals. When they perk up and stare and you know they heard something you didn't and you're like, oh man, this isn't good. Anyways, then I hear this noise that sounds almost like someone is placing their palms on the window and trying to slide it up. At this point, Hades starts to growl and I piece the heck out of my room and go to my brother's room. I had really bad night terrors, so it wasn't uncommon for me to sleep there because I really liked the comfort of him being there. Well, when I woke up the next morning, I decided to open up the blinds, and there were smeared handprints all over the outside of my window. Stumbled upon this subreddit and thought I would share this creepy memory that stuck with me ever since it happened. I was stupidly lucky and pretty stupid, but obviously I knew better after. I come from a pretty big family, so when my mom takes us grocery shopping, it's a really long, tedious process at the checkout. I feel sorry for her in retrospect because I was an absolute brat when I was little, deliberately running away from her or hiding to scare her. So we were waiting at the tills, and there was a little display by the exit that was advertising Harry Potter books. Naturally, I was super bored waiting for my mom to finish fussing with the shopping, sorting through her massive bag to find her massive purse, which her bank card isn't even in, and so on, and wandered away to look at them. Anyways, standing next to the stand is this old guy. I can't really remember his face. I just remember him as a generic old guy with the whole too high trousers thing. As I picked up the Harry Potter book, it was the first one and I'd only watched the film before. The old man started speaking to me. He said, "Are you sure that you'll be able to read all that?" And I remember being all snotty and offended and going, "Yeah, of course I will." And then he came up really close and he had this really nasty tobacco smell. It wasn't like how my mom smells. I always used to love the smell of her cigarettes and perfume on her cardigans, but like a really nasty stale but damp tobacco smell and kind of cloying. He told me that he had the second book if I was interested, and told me that he would give it to me for free if I would help him with his shopping bag. I was a little bit uncomfortable, but I was also pretty cocky, reasoning that he was old and I could just kick him or something if he turned out to be a weirdo. So I picked up his bag for him and told him he better have the book waiting for me. I get all shuddery remembering this bit because he said, "Yeah, I have it waiting for you, I promise." Also, it always really sticks in my mind that what he had in his bag, it was just bread and some Kit Kats. And that creeps me out because it's so mundane and normal. And I guess you just expect a weird old man to have something creepy, like too much box wine or something. So we walked out to his car and he started telling me how clever I had to be able to read a whole book like Harry Potter by myself, and who my favorite character was, and if I wanted to go to magic school. I was kind of feeling creeped out, but mainly irritated, and just replied as nonchalantly as I could that yes, I would like to go to magic school. And Hermione, obviously. So we get out to his car and he hands me his keys and asks me to open the door for him because his hands hurt. And I say, "No, I don't want to." And he says, "Open the door, you stupid little cow." And I tell him to piss off. He shoves the keys into my hands really roughly and tells me to open the damn car door. And when I throw his keys on the floor, he grabs my head really roughly and starts pulling my hair. I started yelling and swearing at him, and it attracts the attention of several other people in the car park. I guess they thought maybe I was his granddaughter or something, being that I was carrying his bag. Anyways, at this point, these two guys come over and ask him what the heck he thinks he's doing and to let go of me. He lets go of me finally, and I run away as fast as possible, running out of the way of the two guys who were screaming at him and back into Sainsbury's. I was completely silent when my mom started bellowing at me, asking me where I'd been, and I just told her that I'd been outside because I thought I saw a friend. I didn't tell her what happened, and I still haven't. We got out of the supermarket pretty easily because she used the other entrance that leads out to the bus stop instead of the car park, and I spent the next 15 minutes while we waited for the bus with my face glued to her coat in case the old man or the two screaming guys were there. Anyways, it's always stuck with me because nothing came of it. I never saw the old guy at Sainsbury's again, and I was never stopped by any security guard at the supermarket. And it stuck with me because I remember telling myself that I could just kick him if he turned out to be an old creep, and then being utterly helpless when he grabbed my hair. Just feel like I was so bloody lucky. And stupid. This series of events happened 10 years ago, but some of these moments haunt me every day. I was a senior at a large university in the South. I was deeply in love with my girlfriend at the time, Destiny. Our relationship had survived several stints of long distance, often across multiple continents. We were truly devoted to each other. We shared a room in the bottom half of a 2-story duplex with our roommate Teresa. The duplex had 2 rooms and was bright orange, precast slab concrete. The government built our entire neighborhood in the 1940s for returning World War II vets. Over the subsequent decades, the students who took over as tenants as the older families moved to the suburbs painted the duplexes vivid pastels and all sorts of funky color combinations. The accumulation of students and the wild color schemes earned our neighborhood the nickname Partywood. Our city was vibrant, full of art, live music, and youthful energy. There was a new gallery opening our music festival to check out every weekend. The place was a student's dreamland. It was also low on crime. Though these points sound like a perfect combination for fun, they were also a recipe for carelessness and a false sense of invincibility. One evening in autumn, after Destiny and I returned from a late-night concert, we encountered a visibly shaken Teresa in the living room with a blanket pulled up to her neck. The TV was tuned to static, as the local broadcasts had stopped and we poor students couldn't afford cable. She was just looking at the static and listening to the white noise, shaking her head. "Man, Teresa, what's wrong?" asked Destiny. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Teresa looked at us and said bluntly with terror in her eyes, "There was a face in my window. I saw it." I immediately ran into her room. She had pulled the curtains to the edges of the windows to cover every pane of glass. Pulled the curtains back and looked outside. There was nothing but the stately pecan trees in our backyard, swaying in the night breeze. While Destiny comforted Teresa, I went outside and checked the area near her windows for some sign of an intruder. Again, there was nothing. Here I should note that Teresa was a very kind and gentle person, but was very prone to drink. That night, we saw evidence of 2 newly finished bottles of wine. There was also a stack of the horror films that she habitually watched atop the VCR. Destiny made a bed for Teresa on the couch, and eventually, we made our way to the bedroom. "Do you think it's possible her imagination got the best of her, babe?" I whispered to Destiny in the dark. "Maybe so, but she seemed really shaken up," she replied, nuzzling against me. "We shouldn't just dismiss what she said." "You're right," I whispered. I talked to some of the neighbors in the morning and see if anyone has seen or heard anything suspicious. The next day, I did my routine jog through Party Wood and encountered some friends picking up the beer cans and solo cups scattered across the yard, after a rager they had thrown. One of them, Sam, was a buddy from my hometown who I shared a couple of courses with at the university. I told him the events of the night before, and he began to shake his head slowly as a grimace took over his normally cheerful face. "Oh man, Duke, this is bad news. I've been hearing about a peeping Tom running through this neighborhood. I know Teresa does a lot of drinking, but you should all take this very seriously. I mean it. You never know with these guys. They always get bolder and bolder. Watch your back, man." I thanked Sam for the info and, with the heart heavy with concern, turned away to jog back home. As I started to run, Sam caught me by the arm. "And hey, Duke, if y'all need me, just holler and I'll be there to help you. You hear?" Thanking him again, I ran home. I told the girls what I had learned over coffee that morning, and we all agreed to keep our eyes open and to try to not leave anyone home alone at the house. Things were quiet for a couple of months, and the fear which had been in front of our minds gradually disappeared as classes, parties, and the joy of being young and in love returned as our primary preoccupations. That all changed one afternoon in winter when I returned home from class to find a police squad parked out front. I ran inside to find one police officer searching the house and the other examining a broken kitchen window. Apparently, while Teresa was showering and Destiny was napping in her bedroom, somebody had broken in and stolen several pairs of panties out of the dryer and Teresa's keys, which of course included our house key. The police found no physical evidence of the intruder but urged us to change our locks and remain hypervigilant. One officer took me aside and walked me to the backyard. Outside my bedroom window was a chair I didn't recognize. It was pointed at the windows next to our bed. He had been watching us for who knows how many nights, watching us sleep, watching us make love. I nearly puked. We were once again on edge. Teresa took to taping her curtains to the wall so that not even one sliver of space could provide a view of the inside of our room. Destiny had long been planning to move to Germany for a study abroad program, and she said goodbye with a worried face. "I love you. Be careful and take care of Teresa." I was despondent. I missed my girl so badly, and I didn't feel safe in my own home. I took to joining Teresa in her nightly drinking, and we kept to the living room where there were no windows. I tended to sleep on the couch, the bed seeming much too large without Destiny there. One night in January, Teresa was out with friends and I was drunk and full of self-pity. I was approaching 1 a.m., I think, and I headed to the bathroom to relieve myself. My mind drifted to Germany, and I wondered what Destiny was doing at that moment as I sat on the commode. Suddenly, I heard the crunch of dead leaves far off in the backyard. My ears perked up, and adrenaline immediately coursed through my body. I was, however, not finished with my current activities. The crunch of leaves became louder and nearer, and the pattern was unmistakably that of human footsteps. I cannot even begin to describe the absolute dread I felt. Anchored to that toilet, unable to move, knowing if he was coming towards the bathroom window. Finally, the footsteps stopped. The window was about 7 feet above the ground, but there was an air compressor beneath it one could stand on. I waited. My breath held, fear coursing through my brain. Slowly, so freaking slowly, I saw fingers appear at the ledge of the window, like the legs of a tarantula. They wrapped over the ledge, and I saw the top of a head being pulled up into the view. Time seemed to crawl to a stop as his eyes and face came into view. He made eye contact, and I had to believe he was surprised to find, rather than a freshly showered young woman, me, pants around my ankles, fear and rage in my eyes, my fist raised, screaming. "You frickin' weirdo," at the window. He fell backwards, and I hoped that he had broken his neck or his leg as I quickly wiped and pulled my pants on. I sprinted to the backyard and saw his back as he leapt a fence and disappeared into the darkness. I called 911 and the cops came pretty quick. They informed me they had been keeping an eye on the neighborhood as the peeping events had become more frequent. I rode around in a patrol car for an hour trying to find the guy and ID him, but nothing. He simply disappeared. Teresa moved out. She couldn't handle the fear any longer. I didn't blame her. My landlord even cut the rent so I could afford to stay while I looked for a new roommate. The word had spread about the Partywood peeper though, and it was very difficult to find the taker. I'm an honest person, and when people asked why the last roommate left, I felt compelled to tell the truth. That was usually a conversation ender. I talked to Sam about the situation. We came up with a plan. We set up a camera in the bathroom and ran a cable to the TV. We ran the shower, turned the light on, and parted a curtain to make it appear that somebody was probably wet and naked and peepable. Meanwhile, Sam and I watched the monitor in the living room and waited to see if a face appeared in the window. I had purchased a stun baton and bear spray, as well as the zip-tie cuffs that riot police use on protesters. We intended to run to opposite sides of the house, bear spray his face, zip-tie him, and then take him inside, where I honestly planned to use the stun baton on his testicles until the police arrived. I know this is savage. I know it's taking the law into my own hands, and there would likely be legal consequences. But at that time I didn't care. The sense of unease and violation I felt had ruined something inside of me. Something was rotten. I wanted to take it out on him. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, we never had a chance to enact our plan. He never came to my windows again. Soon, I too left the country for a job teaching abroad. Destiny and I reunited in a different continent and tried to put the events behind us. But for the most part, we were able to. I learned years later he had gone on to break into a house and assault one of my neighbors. He was never apprehended. I only wish I could have stopped him before anyone was hurt. That's the story. Thanks for reading. It helps to share this. About 2 years ago, I was a bartender at a local chain restaurant. Now, being a bartender, in my opinion, kind of sucks balls. I'm a bit socially awkward, and the place I live harbors a decent amount of drunk scumbags. Not to mention that we are right behind a courthouse, so any day shift is spent listening to people make bitter jokes about divorce, or loudly exclaim how domestic disturbances aren't that big of a deal. It's extremely ridiculously awkward. One regular named Tim would come in about 3 times a week to order burgers and iced teas. He had been fairly nice and non-invasive for as long as I'd known him, so serving him was not a bother. However, as a Harry Potter fan, I must point out that he looked like a real-life, non-robe-wearing Voldemort. Seriously, spiky teeth, super pale, high-pitched voice, the works. So Tim came in one day for his usual burger and tea, but this week decided to finish with some dessert. This dessert came with white maple dipping sauce. Looked like man juice, by the way. I brought him his dessert, and he turned to me and said, "Any idea what I can do with this sauce?" I replied sarcastically, "I'm pretty sure most people put it on the brownie." His response made me want to vomit. "I'd rather take my sauce and drown you in it." Completely grossed out, I looked at him and very clearly stated that I was uncomfortable with him saying things like that. He quickly left. 2 days later, he comes in again. This time he grabs my arm while I'm serving food to another table and whispers, "I meant what I said, even if you aren't into it." I shook him off and went straight to my manager, told her the situation and asked her for help. I was told that for some reason, I make all of our regulars into creeps and that I wasn't allowed to be rude to him. Seriously? That's awesome. A win for the corporate establishment, right? Tim came back 2 or 3 more times the next week, all on shifts that I worked. He would awkwardly stare at me, make nasty noises when I turned my back on him. I'm assuming at my ass. make gross sexual comments towards me, and just generally creep me out. I wasn't sure at this point if I should say anything, but it was getting to the point where I didn't want to go to work. Not to mention my managers were doing nothing in all of this. So finally I tell my boyfriend John about all of it, and he's livid. He tells me that the next time Tim comes in to call him. Of course, 3 or so days later, Tim rambles in. Immediately I called John. He hauled ass to the restaurant, getting there in what seemed like seconds. Tim seemed to notice that John was not a patron the minute that he walked in. John sat at the bar, kissed me on the cheek, and refused all forms of food or drink while staring ice grenades into that man. Tim finished eating quickly and walked to the parking lot. John almost calmly followed him out, balling his fist the entire way. Looking out the window, all I saw was John walking towards Tim, furiously pointing and hand gesturing while yelling, and Tim backing away hurriedly towards his car. He left in a flash, and I've never seen him again. Edit. I left that job within a month of this happening. Well, because screw that. This happened about 12 years ago. I was 14, my sister was 16. We were traveling with my parents and stopped at a motel right inside the Kentucky state line. It was across the road from a shopping center. Knowing there were a few hours of daylight, we asked my parents if we could go check out the stores. Being in a place we had never been made them hesitate, but it was right there. We were pretty protective of each other already, and it was the middle of the day in a busy shopping center. We were there for a while. 10 minutes before we decided it sucked and headed back to the room. Once we reached the parking lot, we went behind the first building, knowing our room was behind the other side of the second building. Planned on immediately going behind both buildings at once, but there were a lot of cars leaving at once, and it was the easiest way to get out of their way. A truck passed us and dropped somebody off at this room. There might have been conversation, but we weren't paying attention. The truck started driving super slow when it had sped into the lot before. Okay, maybe he saw people walking and decided to slow down. I noticed, but it didn't send up any red flags. We walk about 50 feet, and he's still driving slow still behind us. A medium-sized red flag starts waving in my mind. I peek over to my more streetwise sister, and yeah, she looks a bit concerned. We pick up the pace just a bit, knowing that we are still a few hundred feet and around the building from our room. Looking back, we probably could have started yelling at any time, and he probably would have gone off. But hindsight's 20/20, right? He starts to say something like, "Hey, my buddy and I want to know if you guys want to party. Hop in." Well, while he was talking, we both reflexively looked back, saw the truck guy looking right at us and his friend walking about halfway to us from his room. Sister cut him off and said, "Nope," and we took off running. Reaching the room and slamming into it, Dad opened it right as the truck tore out behind us. Jumbled through what happened to my parents. Never seen my dad so freaked out. Called the cops, they checked the cameras and got the license plate number. Cops took our number and said they would tell us if they caught him. Caught him a week or so later on unrelated stuff. I think he got like 5 years for everything. Back in the late 1990s, my mother worked part-time as a receptionist at a dry cleaner. At this point in time, she was in her late 40s, but still looked like she was in her early 30s. Typical strong jaw / high cheekbones and strong brows / super voluminous hip-length hair. She was no stranger to unwanted attention. Guys would pull up to her at the traffic lights and ask her out. And once somebody cut off a lock of her hair during the grand opening of a casino. She quickly became adept at turning people down in a very polite way. The dry cleaner she worked at was on the other side of town, and she coordinated her hours with my school pickup time. Sometimes she would finish early, allowing her to take a more scenic route home. On one such day, she chose to stop at a beach car park. It was a halfway point in her drive, and a cruise ship was docked at a nearby port, and it caught her attention. She parked her car, exited the vehicle, and sat on a nearby bluestone seawall, which provided a better view. Although her focus was initially on the boat, she noticed a man walking up and down the beachside path. The area was relatively isolated at the time, mostly apartments and restaurants under construction, and she noted there was no reason for the man to be doubling back multiple times. Her observation was accurate. After a few minutes, the man walked up to her. He introduced himself as a doctor with an inner-city clinic. His manner of speech was rehearsed but confident. He steered the conversation almost immediately to the idea of him buying her a hot chocolate from a nearby cafe. My mother was and is extremely health conscious and accordingly rejected his offer, citing a dislike for milk. This threw him off. He had no idea what to say and clearly didn't plan for rejection. He awkwardly brought up the idea of tea and asked my mom to come back to his place, so that he could make some for her. She laughed at him and said she had somewhere to go, but he wouldn't relent. He kept suggesting a time and day for her to visit him in his home for some tea. This remark crossed the line. She said thanks but no thanks, and she had a daughter, me, who needed to be picked up from school, and laughed again at the absurdity of the situation. He was clearly upset by her laughter and emotional disinterest in him, and slunk away in a dejected state. Later on the drive home, she told me this story and remarked on how specific the man was about the initial hot chocolate. She thought most adults would opt for a coffee over hot chocolate, particularly in our city, which has a vibrant coffee culture, and that he seemed incredibly immature for a doctor, in terms of his demeanor, speech, and age. Additionally, why would he buy hot chocolate from a cafe but insist on making tea at home? Her only description of him was that he resembled a Greek friend of hers. Although the experience rubbed her the wrong way, she didn't think anything of it. The initial reports detailing the hot chocolate rapist described him as the man who preyed on younger women at clubs, and she thought it was a coincidence that a similar tactic was used on her. She wasn't young and it happened during the day at a beach, not at a club at night. And she felt the poor guy was just super socially awkward after she said no to the hot chocolate. Surely the man the police were looking for would be a typical suave, sociopath kind of dude. When he, Harry Barkas, was caught in 2010 and jailed, a small courtroom sketch of the man was published in the paper. She knew who it was before she read the article. This story begins when I was in 4th grade, so I was about 9, as I was a bit young for my grade. Because of me being younger than the other kids, I didn't get along with them very well. So whenever we would go out to recess, I would make sure to bring whatever book I was reading at the time. I had my own special place I liked to sit and read. It was a little corner of the playground where barely anybody went. It was a large patch of clovers and other overgrown plants, and had a large bush with the gap between it and the fence. I used to love to sit there. One day I went over to my normal spot and sat with my back facing the bush. I had been reading for a while when I thought I heard a rustling sound behind me. Sometimes squirrels and chipmunks would hang out in the gap between the bush and the fence, so I didn't think much of it. That was until I heard heavy breathing and something tugging on my pigtails. Surprised, I whipped my head around, thinking my hair had gotten caught on a branch or something. But instead there was a boy. He was sitting hunched in the gap between the fence and the bush, leaning forward between the branches with his face mostly obscured by leaves and his arm outstretched, trying to grab at my hair. I screamed and bolted for the picnic table area where the supervising teachers were. I was a very shy little thing back then, so I didn't say anything. Instead, for a long time after that, I sat and read by the teachers during recess. About 3/4 of the way through the school year, I made a friend who we will call Matt. Matt was also a bit of an outcast, and when we got assigned to be in a reading group together, we became friends pretty fast. He was nice enough, but even my 9-year-old self could tell there was something off about him. He was way too clingy, barely ever leaving my side, and constantly coming up with excuses to touch me. I, of course, didn't have any other friends then, so I ignored it. However, one day he told me that he liked me. I had no idea how to react to that, and I just said nothing. He apparently took my silence as a yes because he called my home phone later that night. My mom handed me the phone saying that a friend was asking to talk to me. Since my parents were watching TV downstairs, I decided to go up to my room so I wouldn't bother them. It was Matt. I could barely even say hello before he started saying some seriously weird stuff. He started saying things like, "What do you want to name our kids? When we get to high school, let's run away and start a family." Or, "I bet you look really cute when you're sleeping." Now, this would be creepy for anyone, but I was 9. I had no idea how to handle the situation, so I just stayed away from him. He was not happy about that, constantly glaring at me and just being all around super creepy. A year later, I was halfway through 5th grade and had a serious bully problem, but that's a story for another day. It got so bad that my dad decided one day to not wait until the next school year and instead switch schools the following Monday. 5th grade at my new school was great, and starting in 6th grade, my parents got me my first phone. Of course, I called up Clara, who became my friend after the Matt incident, and let her know about my new phone. A couple more months passed, and one night I got a call from an unknown number. Picking up the phone, I froze when I heard Matt's voice. I still vividly remember what he said. "Hey baby, I missed you so much. Why did you leave me?" Not even a second after he said that, I hung up, blocked his number, and called up Clara, as she was the only person at my old school who had my number. Apparently after school, he had asked to see her phone to call his mom, as he had forgotten his at home. She handed it over to him, as she was a very kind but quite gullible girl. Soon she noticed that he was taking a while and that he had pulled out a pen and was writing something on his arm. She yanked her phone away and he panicked, sprinting off. Looking down at her phone, she saw that he had opened my contact info. I was freaked out but felt safe, as I had blocked his number. That didn't stop him though. He would call me every single week from a different phone, leaving at least 10 messages each time. Every time I would block one number, he would somehow call from another one. When I got a new phone, the call stopped and I forgot about it, until freshman year. At my high school, there were a couple of kids from my old school, and I suddenly remembered Matt. I asked one of the boys, Harry, if he knew what happened to Matt. According to Harry, he got expelled. Teachers had caught him smelling and touching girls' hair, groping female students, trying to sneak into the girls' locker room, and writing extremely explicit stuff about himself and other girls, as well as a few other things that I can't remember. The realization hit me like a freaking semi-truck. Smelling and touching girls' hair. The boy was hiding in the bush when I was in 4th grade. Matt, let's never meet again, ever. Edit, just for some info, I am currently 16. Well, almost 16. I prefer to round that up, to be honest, so this didn't happen too long ago. This happened a few years ago. I, 28 female, was on my way to the BMV before work. For some context, we have 2 major streets, Lane Avenue and Park Avenue, in our city with many residential streets that intersected both avenues. I was headed south from Lane to Park Avenue. My destination was on Park. On one of the intersecting streets, when a woman about 22 years old probably, ran out in front of my truck. My truck was an old Ford that didn't have automatic locks, by the way. I had barely stopped when she hopped in my truck, not even asking through my window for a ride or help. She got in and I told her to get out. She said that she was diabetic and it was her birthday and begged me to go back the opposite direction to her home. I told her no, I had to go to work. She said her boyfriend beat her up. She had not a single scratch or bruise, but I asked if she needed an ambulance anyways. It was like 90 degrees outside and she claimed to be having a diabetic episode, and she begged me not to call. After a few minutes of her arguing, begging, and pleading with me and saying no, I finally and forcefully told her I wasn't moving until she got the heck out of my truck. At this point, she opened the door and jumped out. I started to drive away as soon as her feet hit the ground. She slammed the door shut and yelled through my window, "Oh yeah? Well, I've just been stabbed." and when I looked in the rear view, she was waiting in the road for the next car. I called 911 and told them what happened and where she was. I knew if she were truly diabetic in the 90-plus-degree weather, without food or water, she could become delusional very quickly, but every instinct in my body tells me that she had more sinister intention, especially living in one of the human trafficking hubs of the country. I don't want to know what fate I could have met had I taken her to wherever her supposed destination was. Hello. So I know I posted a story yesterday, but it reminded me of another crazy story that happened to me. I, like most women, have a ton of stories about creepy guys. Telling you guys my story of my weird stalker guy made me feel really good, like getting some weight off my chest. So I felt like sharing this one too. This one takes place about 2 years ago. I was working graveyard in a small town casino in a cafe on Halloween night. I was dressed up as Hermione because I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and my work has a Halloween contest, so I thought I would put myself out there, which I don't usually do, and get in on the fun. Now, my outfit was a skirt. It was pretty short, but I had short leggings under it, and a polo shirt and a tie, all Gryffindor themed. So I'm the cashier and it's about 2 a.m. We don't usually have many customers at this time, but since it's Halloween, we were busier than normal. So I'm just checking people out, doing my job, actually having a good time, seeing everybody dressed up, when this guy comes to the counter. I can tell immediately that he's drunk. He was super tall, past 6 feet and really buff and bald. I remember his total was like $2.40. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. Anyways, he had a $100 bill for me. I told him I had to get my manager to get change. He looks at me and says, "No, this is for you. I'll pay for the coffee separately." Now, as a cashier, we hardly ever get tips, but if somebody wants to, they can. But no one has ever tipped this much before, so I was like, not really sure if he was being serious. He then looks me up and down and says, "It's for you to come to my room with me." I immediately hand the $100 bill back and say, "No thank you." He takes out another $100 bill and throws them both at me and goes, "How about now?" I tell him, "No thanks" again. Luckily, security was close by and saw what was going on. He came over and nicely asked the guy to pay for his coffee and leave. The guy looks at the security guard and says, "If she's going to dress like a whore, then she should act like one." At this point, I am very close to tears. I have had my fair share of creepy guys in my life, but never like this. Never in my face like this. The security guy tells him to pay for his coffee and leave immediately or he will be escorted out. The guy looks at me and says, "Okay, bitch, I'll wait for you on our side." You better meet me outside or else. I'm just standing there not really sure what to say or do because this guy was pretty intimidating. The security guy tells him that this is a threat and calls the cops. The guy goes crazy and tries to hit the security guy, but he misses, and the security guy pushes him by a wall and radios over to someone else to call the police. So the creep keeps looking over at me saying, "Why do you guys all act like this? At least I would have paid you, dummy." I'm sure you see the point. This all happened so quickly and escalated so quick, and I felt like I barely had time to think. At this point, I'm crying and my coworkers take me to the back. The cops come and arrest the guy. I guess he had punched a hole through the wall and tried to hit one of the cops. The police took my statement and I was allowed to leave early. The same security guy walked me to my car and I thanked him. Now, the messed up thing is apparently this guy was a huge spender at the casino and the casino didn't even press charges or 86 him or anything. I quit soon after. I apologize if I have some errors. English is not my first language, and this might be a long post. Sorry. For context, I am now 26 and I met my stalker at 14 to 15 years old. So when I was 14, I decided to take ballroom dance classes. That was kind of normal for teenagers in my generation in my country. There you had to change partners each song, so every girl would dance with every boy. In my group that consisted of mostly teens between 14 and 17, there was a really tall dude named Philip. We had a nice chat the times we danced, but he seemed weird, and because I was young and naive, and that's how I normally made friends, I told him where I lived when he asked me. So the stalking began. At that time, I did not realize that it was stalking. I just thought he had a lot of time and that it was annoying. Philip would ride on his bike from his home, he lived one town over, to my house and ask if I wanted to spend time outside with him and play. After doing that a few times, I asked my parents to tell him that I was not home when he would come over. Both my parents and I were very oblivious about his actions for a very long time. At one point in time, the stalking ended for a few weeks and Philip also did not come to dance classes. At that time, I became part of a friend group of a boy I fancied. For some months, he had a girlfriend, but they split soon after and I became his girlfriend. Unfortunately, Philip was also friends with the best friend of my boyfriend, so he was also part of the group. They told me Philip was in a mental hospital. In the span of his stalking, Philip was in a mental hospital multiple times, and every time he was, I was glad because then I had some peace. When I was 16, my family and I had to move because our landlady had thrown us out. She wanted to live in the property herself, so we moved one town over. We started living 2 streets apart from my stalker, and every time Philip was out of the hospital, he would be at my house. It was not as often, but still. At my father's birthday, he rang again, and because my family had guests, they told me to open the door and there he was, looming over me like a dark, menacing shadow man. I told him to leave and I tried to close the door, but he blocked it. So I was standing there, afraid, asking him to leave. At one time, I even ran inside to get my dad to send him away, but my dad said, "He is your friend, so it's your problem." So I went back to the door and I begged and pleaded that Philip please leave. At one point, he was kneeling and sitting in my doorway. After almost 2 hours, he finally left, and at that point, it was obvious for me. Finally, I had realized what type of behavior it was. He was a stalker and he was fixated on me. The next day, I sat down with my parents and told them that I was afraid of Philip, and my dad also apologized to me for putting me in that situation and not helping. The next time Philip came to my house, my dad was there and told him that I do not want any contact with him, so he left. After a few more incidents like that, he stopped showing up at my door and I thought we got rid of my stalker. But every time I started to live happily, starting to forget my fear of him, a letter, an email, or a gift showed up and would send me back into my fears. At 20, I was out of school, and to pass the year, I had to wait to start my job. I worked in a grade school in a voluntary after-school care club for grade schoolers. After a month or two, my mom woke me up in the morning and told me to get dressed because she had called the cops. Apparently, Philip was again every morning at our door and asked for me, and my parents didn't tell me so I wouldn't get scared again. Finally, after the cops told Philip 3 times to leave, and he ignored them, they arrested him and he screamed and screamed my name, and that he was burning for me, and that the cops heard him. My parents and I were standing in the kitchen listening. The situation was just so absurd, and so much for me that I started laughing actually. We filed a report at the police for stalking and trespassing, but the officers said that they could not do anything because he hadn't hurt me physically. We tried to get a restraining order, but it didn't go through. A week later, Philip had sneaked into our garden, and like in a movie, he threw rocks at my window. Throwing rocks at a girl's window is not romantic, it's creepy. Idiotically, I opened the window, but did not see anything until it clicked, and I ran downstairs and told my dad that my stalker was in the garden. Philip escaped. A week after that, I was in the kitchen cooking when Philip rang the doorbell again, and because we have no way of seeing who was at the door, I opened it. There he was again, telling me that he missed me and saying that he had peeked through the blinds of the windows in the living room the past week to see if I was there. My parents were not home. If they had been, I would have run, but like this, I had to swallow my fear and stand in the doorway, listening to Philip talking to my boyfriend. A different boyfriend came, I had sent him an SOS SMS, and he was on his way. After my boyfriend arrived, he told Philip to leave, and he did. Philip mentioned in passing that he also now has a girlfriend. After that, I didn't see him for a long time. A friend told me that he was taken by the men in white coats because he had believed that his mom was possessed by the devil. I was glad. It wasn't until 2 years later when I got a letter from court. I was a witness and told to attend in a case of assault with Philip. Apparently, after coming out of the mental hospital, he had a big fight with his girlfriend, and because she was scared, she played dead. Philip called an ambulance, and the police finally had something against him. After the hearing, he was admitted again to a mental hospital, and I finally got a restraining order. And he was ordered to stay at least 30 meters away from our property. I was so glad. The restraining order also implied that if he broke any of the requirements, he would go to jail. So, it was over. 2 years ago, I also moved out of my parents' house. I am posting this only now because I believe I'm seeing him again. But it can't be. He doesn't know where I live, and he also hasn't shown up at my parents' house. But I believe I have seen him when I leave the house. I just need reassurance that it's not him again and that I'm safe at my home. Update. So I installed a camera, and my neighbors also told me that there works a man that looks quite similar to Philip at the senior living center the street over. So for now, I think I'm safe. I believe I saw that person and not Philip. Thanks so much for all of your advice, by the way. I'm very grateful. I grew up in an extremely rural Midwestern state. My family lived in the country between two small towns. I had attended school in both small towns and knew most of the families in the area, either by face or by last name. One night, it was about 10 or 11 and I was leaving a high school basketball game in Town A. I was around 15 and driving on my school permit past curfew. I had borrowed my uncle's car, an early 90s Toyota, with a leak in the gas tank that caused me to run out of gas before I made it more than 5 or 6 miles out of town, and I had about 7 left to go. I was on a long stretch of road that served as a shortcut between two main highways in the aforementioned towns and wasn't heavily traveled. There were a few houses, but they were stretched far apart, and at the time, as well as to this day, cell phone reception was very spotty. I waited a while, and finally a nice, newer red truck with an extended cab, a toolbox in the back, and a construction company logo on the side pulled up. It was a Friday or Saturday night, and there was a man inside with a woman and 2 girls. He offered me his phone. I remember noticing it was a track phone, which my friends and I at the time refers to as a crack phone, because you can't trace the owners and they are frequently used by drug addicts. They're also used by a lot of people who can't use a standard phone plan though, but the family was driving a really nice vehicle, and they seemed super clean cut, so it struck me as weird. The phone got no reception. I tried calling my parents a few times and finally gave up. The truck had been headed away from Town B towards Town A, where I had just come from, so when they offered me a ride, I thought nothing of it. I had a gas can in the trunk and all of my friends lived in Town A, so I figured they could drop me off at the gas station on their way to their destination, and I could find a ride back with somebody I knew. When I got in the car, I was caught off guard by the way the woman, who I assumed was his wife, and the 2 girls, who I assumed were their children, were dressed. Conservative families, even Amish and Mennonites, aren't even uncommon where I'm from. But for the man being otherwise modern, wearing jeans, driving a sort of flashy truck, and owning a cell phone, the females' clothing surprised me. They all wore long, heavy skirts with button-up blouses and thin bonnets on their head. One of the girls seemed to have a disability and made grunting noises every so often. Other than her noises, the women were completely silent. Everything seemed fine to me until the man driving turned around and started driving the opposite way of the direction he had been driving. The closest town the other way was still 15 or more miles, and it seemed very out of the way. Out of politeness, I reminded him that I had come from Town A, knew everybody there and could find a ride home. It was late, and I figured he needed to get his family where they were going. That's when he told me that he was from Town B, that he had a full gas can waiting at his house, that he would take me there and bring me back to my car to fill it up. Still trying to be polite, I told him it was unnecessary and my house was on the way to Town B, just a few miles away, and he could drop me off there. He didn't reply. I started to feel like something was off. I'm from an area where people go out of their way to help others, yes, but it seems like too much. I had insisted numerous times that he didn't have to drive nearly 30 miles out of his way to get me gas. He could simply drop me off on his way to his destination, or if he wanted to make sure I made it home fine, he could drop me off at home. In my uneasiness, I started making small talk. I asked him his name, and his last name was unfamiliar to me, which was surprising but not totally unbelievable. Coming from a town of around 3,000 people, where I had spent the first decade of my life and where both of my parents still worked, I remember wishing that I had paid attention to the construction company name on the side of the truck, since most companies in my area were named after a family. As we got closer to the turnoff to my house, I started to get more frantic. I realized that these people, who didn't even seem overly friendly, were insisting that we drive completely out of the way, late at night in a rural community, to fix a fairly commonplace mishap. I had no idea who they were. I had never seen them before. I had no cell phone reception, and their cell phone was undetectable. Even if it wasn't what they were trying to do, making me disappear would be a pretty easy task. I started kind of shrieking that they just dropped me off at my house, but nobody in the car seemed like they heard me. Finally, in a bit of a panic, I screamed at the top of my voice, "This is my turn. Take me home. Please take me home right now." Finally, for the first time, the wife spoke up, yelling at the man angrily and somewhat annoyed, "Just take her home." Outside of the girl's grunting, the car fell silent. He swerved angrily onto my road, pulled into my driveway, led me out, and then reversed out of the driveway so fast that the tires spit gravel and I couldn't even see the license plate or name of the company through the dust. I ran inside and woke up my parents to tell them what happened. They just yelled at me because I was driving past curfew. I don't know for sure what the intentions were, and maybe they just wanted to help, but I felt really uneasy the whole time. Not as scary as some stuff on here, but that's my experience. So, in the summers of '08 and '09, I was a lifeguard at a local private swimming pool. I was known for being a really nice, laid-back kid. I would give some leeway for those who liked a small running start to dive into the deep end and let people hold others on their shoulders and things like that. Even though I was laid back most of the time, I still had to crack the whip every now and then. A lot of kids would curse loudly or talk about things that just shouldn't be said in a family environment. I had a lot of friends who went to the pool, most of them being girls. I remember one day when a friend came up to me during a break and told me a kid was being really weird and saying gross things to her. I told her if it happens again to let me know. A few minutes after the break ends, I'm in my chair and find her on the shallower side of the pool with some of our other friends. I then notice a guy a few years older than us, maybe mid-20s, 6'2", wade up to her and our friends. He says something I couldn't make out, sees the girl squirm and make uncomfortable faces, and this guy starts laughing. My friend Megan then comes swimming over to me, saying he did it again. I tell her that I saw and immediately blow my whistle. Now, I'm sure all of you can remember swimming at a pool and hearing the lifeguard's whistle and how quiet it gets when everybody turns to look at them. That's what happened. I look at him and shout, "Hey." I realized I didn't know his name. I asked Megan if she knew. It was Dylan. So again I shout, "Hey Dylan, come here." I tell Megan to leave as he swims over. By this time the people realized it had nothing to do with them and went back to their own thing. When he gets to me, I lean down and tell him that I know he's been saying inappropriate things to my friends, and he needs to stop or I will kick him out. He laughs it off, saying it's no big deal and that he was only messing around. I correct him, saying it's actually a very big deal and he should not do it anymore. He agrees and I let him go. A few hours later, the pool is getting ready to close. I hear a scream and look to see Megan with her jaw dropped and swimming away from Dylan very fast with a look of utter shock on her face. Then another friend, Elizabeth, does the same thing, and again Noelle does it too. All the while Dylan is laughing his ass off. I tried getting their attention, but without even looking at me or talking, my friends leave the pool and walk to the sound, which is literally a football field away. Dylan right behind them. I wanted to go after them, but I needed to close the pool up. After doing so in a very fast and sloppy manner, I head over there as fast as possible to find my friends yelling at Dylan to leave them alone. A few other patrons from the pool headed over to the sound for some extra swimming, so I know they were watching this all go down. It was not a quiet scene. I demanded to know what was going on, and Noel told me that when the pool was getting ready to close up, Dylan went around and started poking his toes and fingers into their butts. It wasn't just them either. He had done it to several girls while there. They just didn't bother to do anything about it. I was mad, not only because he was doing it to my friends, but also because I, as a lifeguard, should have seen this as it happened and stopped it. I was fuming, screaming at this guy about why he would do such a thing. He's still laughing about it, tells me to calm down. I tell him to F off right now before I put his ass to the sand. Keep in mind that he was 6'2" and I'm probably only 5'8". When I said this, he went from laughing to being quite serious. He said something along the lines of, "You have no idea what I do to you, kid, or what I do to those girls if given the chance." Nope. I wasn't having it. He went way too far with that one. Still being in my lifeguard attire, I take my whistle off and hand it to Elizabeth. Take my flip-flops off and kick them to the side. Pull my sunglasses off my shirt collar and set them with Elizabeth. I looked him in the eyes while putting my fists up and said I wasn't giving him the chance. I started walking towards him when I see him finally realize that I wasn't messing around. He quickly puts his fists up, and as I'm almost in range, he throws an early punch, missing me by a few inches. Take the opportunity, rush in, and throw a quick 1-2, and hit him at the chin/nose level, knocking him back a few steps. I shoot in for a takedown, grab him, pick him up onto my right shoulder, and slam him down into the sand, driving my shoulder into his stomach on impact. I hear him wheezing and gasping for air a little bit, with blood coming out of his nose. I stand up and look at him. I tell him if I ever see him at my pool again, I'll make it worse. By this time, there is a small crowd of people, most of who were from the pool, watching, including my friends. I turn to them and tell them let's go. I gave them all a ride back to their houses and told them if they ever see him again, to find the closest adult and stay near them and keep 911 ready to call. We never see him again though. Megan told me later on that she read in the paper about a guy named Dylan who was being charged with rape. She didn't recognize that last name, but then again, we never learned his. Update. It's become quite apparent that a lot of you think this story is made up. I seriously have no idea what would make you people think this. Is it the fact that it ended with me actually doing something to the person, instead of running away and calling the cops? A lot of you are also saying that I should have called the police because of the assault. And you know what? You're right. I should have. But being a 16-year-old kid, I didn't think like that. I was thinking more about kicking this guy's ass to get my friends away from him. If it were today, I still would have kicked his ass, just called the cops after. And there is really no reason for you guys to doubt my story. If you do, you might as well start calling everybody else who posts in this sub a liar. This happened this past Saturday at my bachelorette party. The theme of my party was boats and hoes, and took place on a lake surrounded by mansions. One of my best friends lives there. The day started off awesome. I was surrounded by a plethora of paper, chocolate, light up, and inflatable penises. We spent the day on the lake hooting and hollering and making all the other boaters laugh with our 6-foot blow-up man poles. This is a really nice lake community, but they also like to party, so they are all in good spirits about the explicit nature of our voyage. Anywho, we get back to shore happy that we made our presence known to the entire lake. The annual community party is in a few hours, so we get ready and shine up the old lads for another show. We head over to the party on the boat, pontoon, and try to bank the boat at the park where the party is. A couple of times until we're sure it's pulled up far enough to not float away, which is relevant for later. So, we roll in. The life of this snooze fest. And the desperate housewives and their bold drunk husbands, are all about the D. It's a good time. I'm working on an awesome guitar solo when I smell someone behind me. Cigarettes and booze and BO and I want to vomit. Creep is in a pitted out gray t-shirt and black basketball shorts. Probably mid-40s and definitely not a member of this upper class community. So, you like dicks, huh? I think my friend Willie is pretty funny. Yes. Monotone, by the way. No eye contact or smiles. I start to walk away. I bet you like a lot of it, don't you? He said. I give him a what the heck look. No. Are you gonna use that on yourself later? I walk away quickly and don't look back. I find my girlfriends and tell them to be on creep alert. Next thing I know, he approaches my sister and asks her the same questions. She tells me, we tell the gang, and we are all on high alert. Then he approaches my soon-to-be sister-in-law. So how old is the bride? Sister-in-law gives him the, are you freaking kidding me? Look, and my friend Jay comes to the rescue. None of your business. I brought my friends here to have a good time and you're creeping us out, so leave us alone. He then scurries away into the shadows. Not long after, we see him and his friend watching us on the dance floor. We keep an eye on him. Luckily, the band are on their last song. It's going on 2 a.m. and we regroup around the picnic table for a while. Creep is nowhere in sight. When we are ready to call it a night, we walk back to our boat. We are confused because we can't find it until we notice that it's floating away. Somebody had minutes before pushed the boat offshore. A couple of the girls jump in after it, and that's when we see their boat off a ways with all of their lights out watching us. We officially went from feeling annoyed to feeling threatened. The girls get the boat back to us and we all got on. The dark boat starts driving away down the lake. Crap. We have to go that way to get to the lake house that we're staying at. We give them distance until we can no longer see their boat. They never turn their lights back on and head home. As we are docking in front of our lake house, we see that the boat is coming up behind us. They snuck away and had then followed us. Great. They know where we're staying now. Well, I'm feeling brave at this point, so I stand at the end of the dock as they coast slowly by. I'm staring them dead in the eyes. I see you weirdos. They're looking back at me the same exact way. Screw this. We run back inside, lock all the doors, and hope that we have no other encounters with these hillbilly Chernobyl creepy fricks. I know that jerking around with a bunch of dicks isn't exactly giving off the best vibes, but we are clearly having good-hearted fun with the community and not dressing slutty or being flirtatious or anything. I can still smell this weirdo. There always has to be someone to ruin the fun, huh? This story is a little different than the usual ones because it wasn't a stranger on the street or an insane ex situation. But the entire experience creeped me out, and since I liked reading the stories here, I figured I should submit my own. I'll put a line where the actual meeting of these people starts, as there was a bit of a lead up that made me a bit uncomfortable and confused from the get-go. About a week ago, I was looking through Craigslist job postings and typed in hostess. Filled out a handful for restaurants and bars, one that sounded like it was for an art gallery of some kind, and there was one for a gentleman's club. I actually had been reading an Ask Reddit thread about stories from women who worked at places like Hooters and had been thinking about how entertaining a job in a place like that could be. The ad said they were looking for hostesses, waitresses, and entertainers, and if interested to send a resume and a photo of yourself smiling. No nudity required. I sent a short email saying I was interested in the hostess position if it was still available. The ad was like 15 days old. Put my contact info in and attached my photo and resume. I had an email from the woman doing the hiring the next day. It looked a little bit strange. Maybe I'm nitpicky, but it just looked really unprofessional. There were misspellings, no punctuation, unless you count the completely random ellipses, up to 4 spaces in between words, but not even consistently, and it said to just come to the club whenever. I replied saying I could come in to talk with her on Monday at 10 a.m. and to let me know if that was a convenient time for her. She said, "Sounds great," and that was it. On Monday, I go to the club. It's giant, and there's a large screen over their front entrance displaying those generic cam girl pictures and things like caution, nudity inside, and VIP rooms. I was actually relieved that it was a big place. At least it wasn't some hole in the wall. Go to step inside and the door was locked. Then I look at the pink painted letters and see it's open from late afternoon to 2:30 a.m. I figured that about the actual club portion, but I thought there'd be an office in back or something since this is where she told me to go. I knocked a few times and peer inside. The lights are off. Everything is locked up and put away. I realized then that I never got her number, so I can't email her from there. I get home and send an email letting her know I showed up for my interview and that nobody was there. Then I get this reply. "Oh no, I'm so sorry. We have an office next to the club. Please come back." She had accidentally told me to go to the wrong place. It's almost an hour away and I didn't have time to go all the way back a second time that day. I decide I'll try again tomorrow. So I'm back at the club the next day. I walk along the edge of the building past the actual area, and there's just flat concrete for several feet. Then at the end, I see a large open doorway shape. No door, but there's a hands railing and plain concrete stairs leading up. I actually took my mace out of my purse and put it in the right hand pocket of my coat. I know, a bit paranoid. I head up and come to a bright little office area with glass doors. The doors don't say anything to indicate they're affiliated with the club. There's no logo or matching pink color like the club door. I go in and see a man sitting behind a small front desk. I ask if I'm in the right place to talk to the woman I'd been emailing. He started to say yes and stood up, and my first thought was this guy just masturbating before I walked in? His pants are up properly on the sides and in the back, but the front is tugged down to the bottom of his crotch and all wrinkled. The button is only half looped into the hole, and the zipper is completely down, with part of his button-up shirt sticking partially out of the opening. He gestures to a small office behind him and sits down again. Honestly, I tried to look at his screen as I walked behind him to see if there was porn on his computer. Couldn't see it though. I was at once disappointed and relieved. I get into the office and there is a bleach blonde woman in her 60s sitting behind the desk. I introduce myself and apologize for the mistake the previous day. From the moment I started talking to her, it felt weird. Her effect was very strange. Sometimes it seemed like she clicked off and rebooted and would just completely change what she was talking about. She just felt creepy. Like when somebody doesn't say or do anything to you, but something about them gives you a really bad feeling. She hands me a piece of paper to fill out with contact information and some basic questions. We chat for a moment as I fill it out. Then she suddenly starts talking in a quiet, concerned voice and says, "Do you know what's a strip club?" What? Let's say I was so innocent-minded that I had no idea what gentleman's club meant. Why would I still not know after seeing the giant screen displaying half-naked women? I say yes, and then her voice changes back and she started complimenting my shoes and talking about other things again. She asks me where I'm living since I just recently moved here. I tell her and she recognizes the area. Talks about how nice it is and asks me if it's hard getting all the way out here. No, I say. It's about 40 to 50 minutes by bus. Not too bad at all. She asks me for my social security card and I realize I forgot it. I let her know I have one. It's just packed in a folder with all of my important documents at home. She then asks, "Where is it though?" I reply again, "At my home." "What do you mean home though?" I get confused. We had just been talking about where I'm living not even 30 seconds ago, so it's not as if she doesn't know where my home is. All that comes out of my mouth is, "It's where I live." The instant I get out live, she reboots and starts talking about giving me a tour of the club. As we walk around the dim club, she's showing me stages, soundproof VIP rooms, etc. I realize she's talking to me as if I'm applying to be a dancer. So I start asking specifically about the hostess job. She's ignoring me and giving me uninterested answers. "So, is there an area in front I'd be at most of the night as a hostess?" "Well, yeah, it's down over there," waving her hands in the general direction, and this is the main stage. The tour finishes up and we're back in the office. There are photos all over her walls of girls who look barely 18, smiling with their friends, and holding up their paperwork they just signed to start working as strippers. I ask another question about the hostess job and finally get, well, I don't know if we have one of those. Then she says they do, but she doesn't know what's going on with the current hostess and that she is talking about switching to dancing. Most girls do, she says and looks at me. She's going to try to shove me into stripping no matter what I sign up for. Confirmed. Then she asks if I'd like to come in the next night as a waitress because they make a lot of money. I mean, the dancers make more, but waitresses get good tips. No, I'm officially done here. I say I have some more interviews coming up and ask if she'd be alright with me emailing her on Monday if I'm still interested and available. She puts her head down and her voice becomes quiet and pouty. Oh, she says. Okay. I'm staring at her trying to not make a face and thinking, is this real life? Are you seriously pouting because I hostess zoned you and won't get naked in your creepy club? She looks up and says in a different tone, well, honey, I think you're really cute. You would do really well here. She stretches out the last words. Screw this. I stand up and thank her for meeting with me. She stays seated at her desk as I reach over to shake her hand and then I leave. Bit of an epilogue. I told my housemate about the whole thing, and at one point, when I mentioned with emails and the woman's name, she said, wait, I think I applied there before when I first got out here. I remember talking with someone who sent emails like that, and the whole interaction felt weird somehow. Did you interview with her? No, that's the thing, I never got one. It was so hard trying to nail down a time with her to go do that. Then she started emailing me things that seemed more about dancing than waitressing or hostessing. I let her know that I absolutely was not interested in eventually dancing, but I was completely comfortable with having one of the other positions and asked if that was going to be an issue. I got a reply that I felt very strange and amounted to, well then, you shouldn't even bother coming in. So, creepy strip club madam, let's not meet again. And to your receptionist, check your zipper, man. When I was accepted into a college that was far from my hometown, I didn't really know anyone else who lived there. The college I went to didn't have dorms, but they did have apartments that they suggested students live in due to the proximity to the college, and I'm sure they got a kickback for people who signed up and said they heard about the apartment complex through the college. I was pretty broke at that point, plus I wanted to meet some new people right away, so I chose my apartment largely due to a roommate matching service they had. Basically, you had to fill out a questionnaire about your demographics and hobbies or interests, and the service would match you with roommates that are compatible with you. Mind you, I chose this particular apartment despite the 1-star reviews I saw across the board online. I mean, they were under new management and it was only a year lease. It couldn't be that bad. I was matched with another guy in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment. I was excited to move in and meet him. I moved in a few days after the lease started, probably about 3 weeks before school did, and already began regretting my decision. The apartment was crap and smelled like mold and old cigarettes. In fact, there was a used ashtray on the coffee table when I first got there. When they said it was furnished, I didn't expect it to be exactly like home. My new roommate didn't show up for about a week. When he finally did, I found out that he was about 35 and didn't even go to my school. He was pretty scruffy and smelled like old cigarettes and BO. Eventually, I found out that he used to be homeless and took out student loans to afford the application fee and first few months' rent, but he never enrolled in classes. After the first few months, he stopped paying rent, and it took about 6 months for the property to finally evict him. In the state I lived in, you had to evict judicially, and the courts were bogged down, so it took a little while. While he lived in my apartment, he never changed his clothes. He always wore the same beat-up looking camo pants and stained dirty wife beater. I even offered him some clothes I was getting rid of that would have fit him fine. He was content though, so whatever. He would also have a lot of his old roommates from when he lived at homeless shelters over. It wouldn't be uncommon for me to come home to a random person doing laundry, even when my roommate wasn't home. When I would have a guy over to hang out in my room, he would watch us walk from the front door to my room, through a crack in his door just wide enough for me to see the creepiest look on his face. Literally every time. Needless to say, he gave me the creeps. A few months after school started and after I was noticing his creepy behavior more and more, I was in my room asleep with the guy that I was talking to at the time. Actually still my boyfriend now. When I heard a knock on my bedroom door. I look at the clock and it's about 3 in the morning. I get up to go see what whoever it was wanted and open my door to a random dirty and old naked guy. He said that he's a friend of my roommate and thought my roommate was in my room with me. I flipped the heck out. Obviously, my roommate isn't in my room with me. In order to get into my apartment, my roommate would have had to let him in, and the apartment isn't very big, so it wasn't like my roommate could have gone somewhere else, so his friends wouldn't know where he was. He was either in the living room or in his room. I throw this dude out, him being butt-ass naked, and let myself into my roommate's room. This is the first time I've been in there, mainly because I have no reason to associate with him, and he's sitting in the corner doing absolutely nothing with his lights off, almost as if he were waiting for me to come in there. I ask him about everything that just happened and he tries to play dumb like he didn't even know the guy. Somebody had to let him in and it wasn't me. I drop it, begrudgingly, because the eviction notices are piling up on his door. I figure it's just a matter of time until he's gone. In the meantime, I saw the naked dude randomly in the apartment, doing laundry a handful of times when I would get home from class. Finally, my roommate is evicted and I think I'm done with that, and maybe we'll get another roommate that is actually my age or cool. A few weeks go by that are more or less quiet. Then one day I hear a knock at the front door during the day. When I answer it, I see the random naked dude standing there, thankfully clothed this time, with a trash bag full of what looks like disgusting laundry. He tells me that my roommate said it was cool if he came to use the washer and starts to walk forward like he owns the place. I step in front of him and tell him that his friend doesn't live there anymore and no, he can't use my washing machine. I close the door and lock it and go back to my room. About 20 minutes later, I keep hearing a random noise from my balcony. I lived on the 3rd floor, so I figured it was just a squirrel or a bird out there scratching around. I keep hearing the noise, so I decide to investigate, and I see the homeless guy trying his best to climb up to my balcony. I told him I was calling the cops, but obviously, by the time they got there, he's gone. That same day, I went to the property manager and asked what kind of roommate matching service works like that, and demanded to get out of my lease. After some heated discussion, I persuaded her that it was probably in her best interest to just let me leave. I found a nice 1-bedroom and never looked back. Prowler at the window was not only my first post here, but it is also the very first time I've ever submitted anything I've written to the general public. I never thought of myself as being adept at writing, but I have always enjoyed it. Thanks so much for supporting comments and requests for more. I had no idea that anyone would like it. Strange as it was an honest experience. The bottom was a great source of experience. To be honest, it was probably a lot more sinister than I realized because I was young and naive. Having grown older, it isn't a place where I would want to raise a family in today's world. Back then, it was a more innocent time. My memories of the bottom are both sweet and sour, but it was familiar and it was home. Still, I got to see some pretty terrific and occasionally terrifying things when we lived there. I could tell any of several stories to you. There was the teenager who started lighting fires all over the place one summer, who got caught at the wrong house and nearly got beaten to death. There was the long-haired dude who would break into houses and steal food and panties. He was never caught. There was the kid whose family lived 4 houses down the road from me that shot his neighbor in the back of the head with a gun. 357. There was the swamp monster thing that killed a bunch of dogs and chickens. There was the snake that caught on a trout line that was confiscated by authorities. Then the kid who rode the school bus with me who apparently saw a UFO and was the subject of a television documentary. There were the guys who went noodling and pulled a body out of a hole instead of a fish. We discovered an old, long-forgotten slave cemetery after finding some holes dug in the ground and scattered bones. It was a different kind of community, to say the least. I'm happy to share these stories if anyone wants me to do so, though. This particular incident happened just after school had let out for the summer vacation. It would have been early to mid-June of 77 or 78, and I would have been 9 or 10 years old at this time. Of course it was raining. It was a steady but moderate downpour. My grandfather would have called it a toad floater. It got dark early because of the storm clouds, a dusky wet twilight at around 5 p.m. It was an even gloomier day because I was stuck inside the house. In those days, before cable television, we only got 3 channels on the TV, and at 5 p.m., the news was on all 3 channels. My mother was just beginning to start cooking supper. She placed a pot of red beans on the stove to cook after soaking them all day, and she was in the process of cutting up potatoes to fry when we heard the truck. Our property was bordered on the south side of FM 2797, which stopped in a dead end about a quarter-mile past our house. At the southwest corner of our land was the entrance to Plaza Drive. This was the road that went down to the bottoms. At the northwest corner of our property, the road made a 90-degree turn and followed along our property line to the bottom. This 90-degree corner was the source of many hours of excitement. About once every 3 months, someone either entering or leaving the bottom would try to take that corner too fast and would end up either stuck in the field or, if I were lucky, sideways in the turn and would roll their car if they were going fast enough. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want to see people get hurt, but it was always great fun to watch the tow truck come out and roll the car back out into its wheels and then haul it off. The tow truck driver would normally pick us any of the larger objects that fell out of the car, but they were never diligent about it. I would go over to the corner after the tow truck was gone and look for whatever they'd missed or just not taken the time to retrieve. My main reason for this search was for change that may have fallen out. This meant an extra candy bar to split with my brother. Mom always made me share or a new Hot Wheel. There was something left behind. A shoe, a hairbrush, a baby bottle, etc. I also found a box of bullets. Another time I found a Hustler magazine that opened up a whole new world for me. So a car wreck at the corner was always a cause for excitement. On this particular night, the truck was going way too fast. We could hear it long before it was anywhere near the house. I watched down the road toward the bottom and could see the flashes of light from the headlights as they bounced up and down in the distance. My mother turned to me at this point and said, "Who is that?" We knew most of the cars or trucks by the sound of their engines, but somebody driving this fast was a rarity, especially in the rain. Plaza Drive was loose gravel over compacted clay and was slicker than snot whenever it got wet. After it was soaked through, it turned into a paste that sucked at your tires and left ruts. But the road had been built up over the years, so the water would run off of it before it had a chance to soak in. This resulted in a rounded road more than a flat road, which was fine when it was dry, but more difficult to navigate when wet. "I don't know who it is. It sure is loud," I replied with my nose pressed against the window. Then the lights got brighter and the truck came into view. It was a 68 or so Chevy short bed pickup that was jacked up with big mudder tires on it. It was a very bright red color with a blue driver's side door and a white tailgate. "It's Billy," I told Mom. She muttered under her breath about him killing someone one of these days. She was beating eggs into a cornbread mix extra vigorously, but kept on muttering. "He knows there are kids here." I told her that he was going too fast. By now, I had my nose and both hands pressed to the window. Billy was in front of our house, and there weren't any signs of him slowing. As he passed the house, I watched for brake lights, and sure enough, about 100 feet from the 90-degree turn, much too late to even slow down much, the tailgate lit up. As I watched, the lights lifted a little bit in the air as the front brakes brought the nose down. Then suddenly, those brake lights went about 10 feet into the air and then disappeared. Then I saw one of the headlights and then the brake lights again, rolling over each other in the rain. It finally came to a stop on one of the sides, but I couldn't tell which side. As I was watching and was taking all of this in, my mother half shouted, "What was that?" She'd heard the booms and crunches. She came running over to me, wiping her hands with a dish rag. She came up behind me and looked out the window, and as we both watched, the lower of the two taillights flickered and went out. Then I heard Mom trotting over to use the phone. She picked it up and listened for a moment before dialing. We shared a party line with two other families. One of the families had a teenager about 6 years older than me, whose ear was practically glued to the phone. It was seldom that Mom or Dad was able to use the phone without having to wait for her to finish talking and hang up. Mom was lucky this time and had an open line. Mom called the police and was telling them what happened and where to go. I was watching the truck. I couldn't really see anything but that one tail light and the headlight shining on the weeds in front of it. I was watching to see if somebody was going to crawl out, but never saw anyone. As I was watching the truck, my mom went to the closet to get a raincoat and an umbrella. She was shrugging into the raincoat and giving me instructions at the same time. I was not to leave the house, and I was to keep my brother from touching any of the hot items on the stove if he woke up. Mom started to leave and then said, "Flashlight. I need a flashlight," and went to the utility room at the back of the house to get one. I just turned back to the truck when the front door banged open and a woman half stumbled and half fell into the house. She was skinny with big you-know-what. That was all I noticed at first, being the curious, inquisitive young man that I was. To tell the truth, I didn't really know anything about that at the time, except that everyone at school always talked about them, so I figured it must be important. Then I saw the blood. Her whole head was covered in it. Her hair that I initially thought was brown was actually blonde, but bloody. It was a short, choppy type of cut, and I could see that one of her hoop earrings had been torn out of an ear, and it was bleeding. Her nose was fat and at an angle. Her lips were bleeding, and she had blood in her teeth. Her forehead had several small cuts and gashes that were all oozing. She had a cut under an eye that my dad would have called a rabbit. Her neck was bleeding too. She was wearing black pants and a light blue button shirt that had a frilly lace collar. Waitress uniform. I realized when I saw the name tag. It had one corner broken off and was hanging at an angle with blood staining her shirt behind it. One leg of the black pants was ripped from about mid-thigh down to below the knee, and I could see bits of a bloody leg. She had blue kicks that were the same color as her shirt, but the whole back of one was cut. There was blood there too. As I was taking all of this in, my mom came running up the hall wanting to know what happened. She saw the woman and said, "What? Look at you." She had the woman sit at the table and went into her doctor mode. She got a bowl of water and sat it on the table with a roll of paper towels and began mopping the blood off the woman's face. She was asking one question after the other, but never stopped long enough to let the woman talk. As she got up to get a glass of water for the woman, my father walked in from work. He started to ask about all the blood all over the door, and then saw the woman. Mom looked at him and told him that the police were coming. As Dad was talking to Mom, someone started beating on the door. It was Mr. Laird, who lived on the other side of the road from us, up from the corner. He said that he saw the accident, and by the time he got to the truck, it was empty. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do. The woman started crying and began telling us about how Billy had beat her. She said that he'd used the small end of a fishing rod and beat her until she bled. I hissed at this because I could relate. Just the summer before, I was riding my bike in front of our house and some kids drove by and yelled something at me. My response was to grab a rock and throw it at them. I was pretty handy with a rock, but the car was going too fast and I never had a chance. Worse though, my father saw what I'd done and came striding out to me. He asked me what I'd done and I told him that I hadn't done anything. Then he said that he saw me throw the rock. He thought I lied to him, but I meant that I hadn't done anything to make the kids yell at me. I had a white fiberglass whip antenna with an orange flag mounted on the back of my bike. It was kept in the holder with a screw that was long gone, but if I didn't jump a ramp or ride over anything too bumpy, it stayed in the holder. Before I could explain, Dad grabbed it and grabbed me by the upper arm and gave me 2 quick swats. I was wearing shorts and it stung like nothing I'd ever experienced before. Then he made me walk my bike back to the barn and put it away. I didn't need to be having fun on a bike if I was going to lie to him, so I knew all about how it felt to get a stripe or two. She told Dad that her name was Margaret, which I thought was strange because her name tag clearly said Molly on it, but I knew better than to chime in when adults were talking, so I didn't say anything. She said that she and Billy had been seeing each other off and on for the past 6 months or so. He'd picked her up after work that afternoon, and they'd gone back to his place to get high. He wanted to go get some more, but she wanted to go home and change first, and he got mad and went crazy and started slapping her around. She told us that she got mad and slapped him back, and that was when he punched her in the face. She said that it knocked her across the bed and out, into the hall, and she started to run out the door. But he was behind her and pushed her, and she fell into his coffee table. She told us that he came into the living room with the short end of the fishing rod and just started hitting her. I could see my dad getting mad because his jaw was tightening up. I looked at Mr. Laird, and he was practically shaking, his lips pressed together so hard that they turned white. He lost his wife 2 summers earlier in a boating accident and was left with a 14-year-old daughter and twin 8-year-olds. He was ready to murder. Margaret went on to say that she kicked him in the balls and tried to run out the door, but before she could get outside, he tackled her and they fell into the kitchen. He landed on the floor and she ended up on top of him. She told us that she tried to get up and grab the oven handle for support, but just popped open and she fell back on him again. But that's when she saw the iron skillet inside the oven. She said that she grabbed it and hit him with it in the head. And when he tried to fight back, she hit him again. She said that he bucked his hips and hit her in the ribs. And then she just started hitting him over and over again. He's probably dead. I hope he is. You could practically see the pity rolling off my mother's face. They talked for a few more minutes, and as my mother continued to clean the blood away, my father and Mr. Laird decided to go check on Billy to make sure he was still alive and not lying on the floor with what Mr. Laird called a broke head. As soon as they walked out the door, Margaret changed. At first, she wanted to get her jacket out of the truck, but my mom wouldn't let her leave. She told Margaret that it would be fine and that the police would be there any moment. Then Margaret said her purse was in the truck and she needed to get it. My mom started to tell her that it was okay, but Margaret insisted that her medicine was in the purse and that she needed to take it. My mom is as good as they get. She can be a little backward sometimes, but she's not an idiot. Suspicious now, she asked Margaret what medicine she needed. Margaret stalled. It was obvious that she was searching for a suitable answer. Suddenly, she looked up and actually had a half smile as she held up a single finger and said, "My inhaler. I need my inhaler." Then almost comically, she lost the smile and slumped in the chair and started breathing in a raspy manner. My mom is one of those old souls who looks for the best in any situation. The thought of lying to someone, especially in the time of a crisis, was beyond her, and for some odd reason, she never could believe that anyone would lie to her. Yes, I took advantage of that on more than one occasion. Hey, I was a kid, not a saint. My mom got this worried look on her face. She was obviously torn between leaving me and my brother alone with a strange woman and letting the woman suffer. She looked between Margaret and me, and my brother asleep on the sofa, and the window and back to Margaret. By this time, Margaret was blowing like a racehorse. Between gasps of breath, she told my mom not to worry and that she'd be back in a minute. My mother and I watched as she got up and limped to the door, leaving tracks of blood from her cut foot. We watched out the window and she stumbled across our yard to the road and toward the truck. At that moment, the phone rang and I watched as Mom talked to the caller. From the tone of her voice, I knew it was my dad. She started to tell him about Margaret going back to the truck, but stopped when he started shouting. I could hear his voice through the tiny speaker all the way across the room. When I looked back at the truck, I couldn't see Margaret, but I did see the police arrived, and I said so to Mom. She was finishing the call with a lot of okays and nods of the head. When she hung up the phone, she went over and locked the door and told me to come away from the window. My father and Mr. Laird drove back into sight, but instead of pulling into our yard, they went to where the police were looking over the truck. It was pretty dark by now, and all I could see were the lights from my dad's car, lights from the police car, and that one taillight on Billy's truck. I could also see 2 flashlights shining all over the truck and then inside the truck, and then into the surrounding trees and bushes. I watched my father run up to the police, and I knew he was shouting because both of the flashlights whipped up and over to him. He was pointing back to his car. Then I watched the flashlights start bobbing up and down and back and forth as the policemen went running towards my dad's car. Then I saw the inside light come on and the flashlight beams shining on two men in the back seat. One of the policemen went back to the police car and sat inside for a minute, and then went back to my dad's car. Nothing else happened for a long time. Then I heard the sirens. I watched as a glow of light appeared on the top of the hill where FM 2797 went to town. First, I saw the only bright white glow of the headlights of a car coming from town. I could hear the siren getting louder. Then I saw the red flashes. It was another police car rushing to the scene of the accident. By this time, I was sharing the window with my mother, who was telling me to stay away from the window 5 minutes earlier. As the car got to the bottom of the hill in the entrance of Plaza Drive, I saw that it was a big van. It was an ambulance. This was the first time I'd seen one that wasn't on television. It had lights all over the top of it. It stopped behind my dad's car, and two men jumped out of the back with a stretcher that had a pole with a bag on it. They rolled it to my dad's car, and because of all of the lights, I could see everything now. They were pulling a man out of the back seat and laying him on the stretcher. My first thought was that Mr. Laird had been hurt, but then I saw him walk around the other side of the car. I had no idea who was on that stretcher. After just a minute or two, the men rolled the stretcher back to the ambulance and loaded it inside. I remember thinking how neat it was they didn't have to lift it up. They just pushed it into the back and the legs folded up. They crawled in behind the stretcher and shut the doors. The ambulance turned around and started the siren again and headed back into town. After a few more minutes, a tow truck appeared and I got to watch them pull Billy's truck back onto its wheels. Then, the man moved the tow truck around to the back of Billy's truck and raised the bed of the truck into the air, and then hooked up some more chains and drove away. Billy's truck looked weird, like it had a big hump in the middle or something. This left my dad and Mr. Laird talking with the police. They were all standing in front of the police car in the rain. The police were taking notes on a little pad that they pulled from their shirt pocket. Then the police both shook my dad's hands, and then Mr. Laird's, and everyone got back into their cars. My father dropped Mr. Laird at his house and then came back home. My mom was full of questions and tried to start asking them the moment my dad stepped in the door, but he was covered in blood. She dropped her spatula and asked what happened. Before my dad could even open his mouth, she asked if he was okay. He held up his hands and said that it wasn't his blood, and then glanced over to where I was staring with my mouth hanging open and my eyes as big as a dinner plate. He told my mother to let him take a shower, and then he would tell her everything. She started to protest but relented after a moment as my dad went to their bedroom to get some clean clothes. My mom finished cooking and had the table set by the time he was out. We were all sitting there waiting when he came and sat with us. He said that Billy's been shot bad, 3 times, once in the leg, once in the shoulder, and once in the stomach. He went on to say that the paramedics said it wasn't life-threatening, but he'd lost a lot of blood and would probably be in the hospital for at least a few days. My dad said the police called his family and that his brother was going to watch his house and take care of his dogs. Then he started telling Mom what happened. He and Mr. Laird went to Billy's house, and when they got there, it was a mess. He said from the way it looked, Margaret had been telling the truth. They called his name and heard him out in the back room. When they went to the bedroom, they knew something was wrong. Billy was sitting in a pool of blood. His right hand was tied to the bed frame with zip ties. His head had a knot the size of a softball just above his forehead. Billy told them that he'd met Molly. That was what he called her a few weeks before at a dance club in Liberty. Liberty is the county seat, just across from the river from the bottom, but we'd have to drive about 20 miles to get there by car. They'd met at a dance hall. They'd been out a few times, and he'd promised to take her someplace nice the next time he was home. Billy did oil field work and made a very good salary, but he drank and partied most of it away each week. She was evidently waiting for him when he got home this afternoon. Billy told my father that he thought it was strange that she was at his house without a car, but invited her inside and had just taken a shower, and was getting dressed when she attacked him. He'd been bent over to get his boots from under the bed, and she hit him with the cast iron frying pan. He said that when he woke up, he'd been dragged to the living room and she was trying to tie his feet together with a belt. He said that he kicked her away and got to his feet but was too dizzy, and she was going crazy. She kept asking him where his money was. She knew he didn't trust banks, and he told her that he always cashed his checks on the way home each Friday. He said that he tried to get to his feet, and she saw that he was still dizzy and came at him again with the frying pan. He was able to fend her off and grabbed her legs and pulled her to the floor when she kicked him in the head. He said that they wrestled around the living room for a minute, and she finally got loose and ran to his bedroom and locked the door. He kept a .22 revolver on his nightstand, and she grabbed that and shot him in the stomach through the closed door. He said he fell, and when she heard him fall, she unlocked the door and came out and held the gun to his head and demanded his money. Billy said he grabbed at the gun and she shot him in the shoulder, and then while they were both fighting for the gun, she shot him in the leg. He got the gun away from her, but before he could do anything, she'd grabbed the frying pan and hit him in the head again. When he awoke again, she was in the bathroom going through the pockets of his dirty jeans. She left the pistol on the bed and he grabbed it and was going to shoot her but missed because he was using his left hand and was still dizzy. He told her that he was going to kill her and started trying to get out the zip ties. Molly ran out of the bathroom and he kicked at her, but he heard her run down the stairs and then he heard his truck start. He said he tried to get up but got dizzy and fell again, and the next sound he heard was my father calling his name. Margaret, or Molly, disappeared that night. The police questioned my father the next day to weigh his story and Mr. Laird's story to see if they jived with Billy's version of the story. Mr. Laird stopped by a few days later and told my father that one of his friends who was on the police force told him that they'd gone to her place of employment, but nobody knew anything. She had missed her shift for the last 2 days, and nobody knew anything about her. Found a purse in the truck with almost $3,000 in it, and another gun, and some other random items. But they had no clues about who she was, or where she was from. Billy lost his spleen and was off of work for about 3 months. His truck was a loss too. He kept the bullets they pulled out of him in a big orange pill bottle. He even showed them to me once. Sorry if this was too long or anticlimactic. This is a vivid memory for me on several levels. I got to actually see a wreck as it happened that night. Got to see an ambulance in action for the first time. We had a dangerous woman barge into our house and drip blood all over the place. I knew somebody who got shot. I got to see all the scars and bullets. When you are 10 years old, those kinds of things stick with you. Now, who wants to hear about the kid who lived 4 houses down from me? He was the one who shot his neighbor. I even have a newspaper article about that one. Let me know. I recently moved into an apartment close to my workplace in the city. It is a garden-level apartment that faces a parking garage for the city's education department and a patio-like section of foliage, trees, leaves, etc. Connected to this patio is the alleyway. I've been living here for 2 months, and the apartment itself is pretty quiet. Most of the tenants are just normal blue-collar folk, grad students, and hipsters, basically. Nothing crazy or weird living here. A needle exchange opened up basically across the alleyway this summer and has attracted unsavory characters. In the US, needle exchanges are extremely controversial and are only allowed in several states. Many of them have been hanging around the back of the alleyway and pooping and peeing out there. The leasing office/landlord of the building is trying to get the city to help with this problem. My first encounter with these peeping druggy toms was one Saturday morning. I awoke to hear all of this moaning and groaning from outside of the patio and tree area. When I opened my eyes and peeped outside, I saw a guy completely high on something, sharpening sticks outside by the window. I was super scared, but I didn't know if he saw me because I quickly hid under my kitchen table and called the non-emergency police. They sent somebody out to investigate like 30 minutes later, and when the cop car appeared, he moaned and walked away from the scene before they even got to the patio area. The second time was me sleeping the night before work. It was the night of my birthday. I heard pounding at around 11 p.m. and awoke to it. I had my window slightly cracked open to let cool air in. I don't have AC. And I heard the sound of rap music coming from either a small speaker or phone. I originally thought the pounding was from a neighbor or upstairs. I then realized that the pounding was coming from the window behind me. It got worse and worse with accompanied moaning and blaring rap music. I called the non-emergency police again, and they told me that they would send somebody out and take a look. This continued for another 15 minutes, and I had to go to the bathroom desperately. I couldn't just sit there and hide in my bed. I crawled to my kitchen, got a knife, and went to the bathroom. I figured the burglar bars on my apartment window would deter the pounding. The pounding stopped when I came out of the bathroom. It got almost too quiet. Something about the vibes, the feeling just didn't feel right. I decided, I don't know why still, to peek through the blind slats and shine my phone flashlight through the blinds. What I saw was the guy's face staring right through me in the blinds. It was horrific. His pupils were completely dilated, like a cat's, almost. He could see me and the knife. He pounded right back at me through the burglar blinds and screamed, "I'm going to kill you, you bitch." I don't want to know what he was on, but he was extremely aggressive and seemed invincible on it. I got scared and was in a ton of shock. I shut the crack while he was continuing to pound and turn up his rap music. I ended up crawling back down to my low-lying bed and calling the police, 911. What ended up happening was the cops came once again about 30 minutes later so, and when they came, I heard the guy moaning in alarm and saw him bicycling off as I peeked through the blinds on a BMX bicycle. When I talked to the cops, they were more concerned about how he looked than what he did and seemed overall unconcerned and not very reassuring. I ended up missing work, not getting much sleep, and having to spend half the day recuperating during my birthday. My solution now is shutting the blinds tighter and closing the window at night, and trying to use the swamp cooler and fans before nightfall. I'm also thinking about getting curtains to put over the blinds, but overall I feel this is challenging due to the heat and not having AC. I want to stay cool, and the nighttime breeze really helps, but it's tricky because there are druggy creeps outside, it seems. When I told my boss that I wasn't coming into work the following day, he recommended that I seek a room at higher ground. I don't know if that will help and possibly could be more dangerous, since there are no burglar bars on the first floor and above. While my garden level does, and really is what saved my butt from that guy bursting in and wanting to kill me. I'm an extremely frightened chick from this experience and have gotten more paranoid since. My boyfriend has been really kind this past weekend. This happened on this Thursday night, and offered to stay over more. Since then, it's been quiet, but I heard somebody yelling last night outside so loud, I could hear it through the shut window. I feel like the cops have not been very helpful and don't take it very seriously. This happened about a year ago. I'm 16 now. He's going to be 20 in August. We met through the internet. It turned out he lived in a city right next to my village. I was 12 then and he was 16. We quickly lost contact. After 2 years, I texted him again, because my friends edited a photo of him and dared me to send it. He seemed nice and we had a lot of shared interests, and talking with him felt pretty natural. I was used to age differences, because for some reason I never met people my age, so I didn't mind it. He took the bus to my village a couple of times, and we hit it off pretty well. He even met my best friend. Then I heard he had a Skype call with one of my online friends specifically, that he told her now his last girlfriend supposedly died. My friend felt like he was beginning to crush on her, maybe because she was nice and all too kind. The other friend voiced her worry over him turning her into his ex. She was understandably grossed out. My friends talked with him about it, and I asked why he told them but not me. He said I was too immature to understand. I was upset. I was the person who introduced him to my friend group, and he was trying to forcefully cut me out of it. My friends had enough and cut him out instead. I didn't. I felt really bad for him. He was an orphan and he lived alone. He had issues with alcohol and he had a lot of trouble with depression even, I think. Losing 3 people could have been devastating, so I kept messaging him, maybe out of pity. But he turned very, very creepy very fast. Suddenly, he called me darling. I was over the moon because I caught feelings. A little puppy crush on somebody I knew I could never date, but who gave me the hope that maybe, just maybe I could. He spent more time with me, sending me pictures and videos of him going on about his day. Nothing unusual. Until one time we called while I was busy playing a game on my laptop. I don't remember what was said exactly, but I remember him being very excited, that 15 is the legal age in Poland. I was excited too. I don't know why. I remember being very, very stiff, even though this was just a harmless phone conversation. The joke was, until February, because I would turn 15 then. He was supposed to visit. I felt like I owed him everything, just because he had issues with his mental health. He told me that his psychiatrist said she had never met someone so young that has still lived through so much. Even though our conversation wasn't about depression at all, I felt so bad for him. That's why I never said anything about things he did that creeped me out or made me feel unsafe, because I was afraid that he would feel worse and do something. He would try to manipulate me about his depression. When he visited, I learned he still had feelings for his supposedly dead ex-girlfriend. He played a song that was their song. Every word in it described their relationship. While we were in my room, he was close to crying, but I had no idea what to do. He put me in this situation, even though he knew I wasn't equipped to deal with it. Once when I was upset, I told him I didn't want to be cheered up. I just didn't. I wanted to be alone. So he sent me tens of texts, pictures, and cheap cheer up LOL things that he found on his phone. It was the one time I set some sort of boundary and he broke it immediately with a "oops, sorry, too late" message following. I had a school trip in October and I had a good time, from what I remember. For some reason, I lost all of my feelings for him then and there. Maybe because for once I didn't force myself to feel bad for him and constantly check if he's online, wants to talk, or if something happened. Maybe because all of my friends thought we were going to date and it was really unnerving that they didn't see anything wrong with it. I cut contact with him later, very slowly. I deleted him off of things he never checks, blocked his number, and then blocked him on Facebook. He noticed, and I never looked back. Later on, through yet another friend, the only one that kept contact with him, I learned that his ex wasn't dead. Or maybe she was. There were screenshots of him talking with the family member about the funeral, then screenshots of him talking about moving in with a girl 2 years older than he was, who's the love of his life, who had the same name as his ex. He sent a picture that was supposed to prove that he was in a psych ward, but even my friend refused to believe him. I don't even know what he was lying about in the end, or if he was lying at all. Next school year, I'll be going to a school in the city he lives in. I know he's still there, so let's not meet, please. I started working at my current summer/part-time job last spring. I am situated in a large old building that used to be a country club but fell into disrepair about 10 years ago. Although there's nothing paranormal about my story, it is maybe worth mentioning that the former manager died in the main office upstairs when they went out of business. It sort of adds to the unsettling quality of this place. Along with that, so do the seemingly never-ending hallways and passages, innumerable hidey holes and half-empty pools, and other strange unused parts of the building, like a secret shower room and sauna, and a tunnel of storage areas that connect the men's and women's bathrooms. There are also a lot of doors to the outside of this place. It makes sense for a country club, but currently we only use one small room for the golf course check-in, the kitchen, and one dining room for the restaurant upstairs, and the small cafe area for early morning golfers to get their coffee and beer. The cafe area is where I work. In the summer, we clock in to open the cafe before 6 a.m., often before the sun comes up. The golf course people come in pretty shortly after, but I would be the first person in the building every morning. I would unlock the front door, disarm the alarm, walk downstairs in the dark, unlock this cage that keeps the drunks at the bar upstairs at night from wandering downstairs, and crawl along a long dark hallway with no windows to get to the light switch at the end of the hall. This always creeps me out, and I end up holding my keys between my fingers like brass knuckles. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, and I've lived in plenty of bad neighborhoods, and ninja sliding down the walls on the opposite side of whatever doorway is coming up, just because it's pitch black and I'm a scaredy cat. By the time I get to the end of the hall and flip the light on, my heart is always pounding out of my chest as I struggle to find the right key to let me in the cafe. The whole situation started when Tem, a golf course employee, mentioned that he kept shutting the door between the men's locker room and bathroom and the storage area that leads to the women's, and every time he would go back in there, it would be open again. This, along with some strange noises, was fodder for the bar regulars upstairs to claim this place was haunted by the old manager and whomever else they say died within these halls. Travis, a co-worker in the cafe, also mentioned that a few minutes after he opened, he went into the men's locker room and noticed that it was steamy and smelled like soap. So he went into the shower room to investigate, and everything was sopping wet and still hot. He was the only person who was supposed to be there at that time of day, but he didn't see anyone, so he let it go. A couple months later, Tim noticed this weird side door that you had to climb up a rickety old staircase to reach, on the side of the building, and it wasn't shutting correctly. He fixed it and it locked correctly, and he didn't think anything more of it. Shortly after, somebody from the golf course came over to tell me that they found someone's entire life packed away in one of their hundreds of lockers that nobody uses, and they thought somebody was living in the storage room between the men's and women's bathrooms. He must have been coming in before the golf course people set the alarms when they left in the evenings, and leaving after the cafe person, me, would come in and turn off the alarm in the morning. And so that means that every morning, as I blindly shuffled my way down that long dark hallway alone, one of those pitch black doorways actually did have somebody hiding behind it. A few days later, a red-faced, angry bald man in Vietnam-era army-issue glasses came into the cafe and started screaming, puffing, and flailing his arms around, yelling about his stuff getting thrown out. He went over to berate the golf course people, so they asked him about the contents of the locker. His answers about specific items led them to realize that this was the man who was secretly living in one of this building's many dark passageways. I never found out much about him, whether he was dangerous or just homeless, but watching him scream about his stuff made it clear that he wasn't 100% rational. I still work there and do a dark shuffle down the hall every morning when I work, and although they say everything is on the up and up with the alarms and the doors locking, it still creeps me the heck out. There have been some other creepy things that have happened in this place recently to make me think that this isn't all over with, which I will post separately if anyone is interested. Edit. The updated post got taken down, so here it is. Monday, I noticed a pad of paper and a long metal pair of tweezers clipped underneath the stair. I thought it probably had something to do with inventory because right before, a manager came in to count the foodstuffs and beverages. Also, it wasn't an area that is easily accessed by customers, but not technically locked in any way during the day. Today, my friend who works at the bar upstairs told me that somebody brought this pad to her, and it has some pretty schizophrenic thoughts in it. It has lots of stuff about how electric cars work to support some kind of government agenda surrounding social media and some plans to patent some sort of alternative energy source that involves the UN and foreign passports. This part of the building is not under video surveillance, so I have no idea who left it and if they were planning on coming back or not, but it could be the same guy from before. He seems pretty unhinged and definitely liked to spend a lot of time in weird parts of this building. My father was a handsome young 20-something, living in a half-sketchy, half-artsy area of Westport, KC, with my mother, and they were newlyweds expecting their first child, my older brother, within a month. This was the mid-1980s. At the time, my father was in the whole Robert Smith kind of look. Longish dark hair, piercings, etc., and kind of had a sensitive or feminine look going on. He had been mistaken as gay before because of his look. Not to stereotype my own people, but you know what I mean here, right? This is kind of an important part. Anyways, my parents had been shopping around Westport on a street full of little boutique-style shops. My mother stepped into a shop to look around, and my father waited outside smoking a cigarette. He said a man came out of an adjacent store and struck up a conversation with him. The man was polite and friendly, but as the conversation continued, he became increasingly personal with his line of questions like, "Where do you live? Do you want to come over?" Stuff like that. My father was young and dumb and too trusting. Having grown up in a very small Kansas town and being newly transplanted to this large city, but still, this man began to strike my dad as odd. Just as it was getting weird, my mom came out of the store, came up behind my dad, and looped her arm through his. Like I said, my mom was heavily pregnant at this point. As soon as the other man saw my mother do this, he stopped what he was saying mid-sentence, turned around, and walked back into the adjacent store without a word. They both thought it was odd, but frankly, my dad was glad to be away from the man. They continued on shopping and went home. That man ended up being the Kansas City Butcher, or Robert Burdella, an active serial killer in the Kansas City and Westport area. His MO was to lure gay men to his home, assault and torture, then kill them. He was caught a few weeks after this encounter with my father when a victim escaped his house, fleeing down the street in only a dog collar. My father highly suspects that Bob Burdella was scoping him out as a potential victim. Upon seeing my pregnant mother, realized he wasn't gay. Oh, and the shop he came out of? That was his shop, Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, an oddities shop that displayed the skull of one of his victims in the window. To give a bit of context, I work in an apartment complex, so I deal with people, especially weird people, all the time. Thankfully, they are usually harmless, but every now and then you get a real crazy one. We had one resident named Gary that was an issue from the day he moved in. Gary lived with his wife and daughter. He came into the office almost every day, asking for maintenance or extensions on paying his rent. Whatever he came in for, he would stay for an hour or more just to chat. At work, we joke that half of our job is being a free friend/therapist. Gary was a perfect example of this because he always wanted to talk about his troubles, his marital issues with his wife, his past criminal record, and his money issues all came up. Eventually, he revealed he and his wife weren't actually together or married. They just had their daughter by accident and were trying to make it work for her. We all got a weird vibe from Gary. He was very intense and also had some anger issues, which he openly admitted to. Because of this, we were all extra nice to him, hoping he wouldn't suddenly change his mind and start taking his anger out on us instead. Because we were so nice, he was constantly telling us how much he owed us and would ask us to come to the restaurant where he worked. We would get drinks and food on the house. After weeks of hounding us to come in, my coworkers and I agreed, just so he could feel debt-free and stop asking. The food was fine, but it was a bit awkward because Gary kept milling around our table, listening in on our conversation. Once we could politely do so, we left. Accepting his offer was a mistake. Gary started referring to himself as our friend and wanted to hang out outside of work more. He was especially drawn to me, asking for my phone number and address, saying he'd love to come hang out with me and my husband, maybe help us out around the house even. I told him he couldn't do that as long as I worked there and he was a resident. Not deterred, he kept coming in. Then there was the skirt incident. I had worn a blouse and skirt to work one day and was giving someone a tour of the property. Gary was outside his apartment and started following us on the tour. When we got back to the office, Gary told me in front of the man from the tour and another resident that my butt was showing. My skirt had 2 layers, and the top layer had accidentally gotten caught up on my blouse, revealing the sheer underlayer, and that he had taken a bunch of pictures to put on Facebook. After correcting my skirt and the other people leaving, I told him to delete the photos and that I was finding his behavior very harassing. It was the first time I had put my foot down with him. He of course said he was joking and would delete the pictures. A few weeks after that incident, his quote-unquote wife left with her daughter. The whole thing was ugly. She had him arrested for supposedly sexually assaulting her and their child. He called me at work from jail to assure me the accusations were false. I have no idea if he assaulted his wife, but I truly doubt he was capable of harming his own daughter. The police eventually released him because of a lack of evidence and suspicious behavior on the wife's part. She stole all of his valuables while he was in jail and then skipped town. Gary then also lost his job, partially due to the arrest and partially due to attacking a patron at the restaurant. Given his now complete lack of income, it was clear that Gary would have to move out. We decided to let him just leave at the end of the month, just because we wanted him gone. As soon as he was out of jail, Gary was in the office almost all day, every day. He would vent about his wife and the things he would do to get back at her. His main focus was taking their daughter away. He was obsessed. When he wasn't in the office, he was harassing his neighbors. He thought they were conspiring against him with his wife. I get multiple complaints a day about him. One girl had to call the courtesy officer in the middle of the night because he forced his way into her apartment, drunk, to cry and scream. I repeatedly told him he needed to stop, but that only fueled his rage, and he would confront his neighbors. "Did you call the office on me?" During this crap month, he also talked constantly about how nice I was, how nobody was ever this kind to him, and that he was going to snatch me up. Although he didn't have money to pay rent. He tried to give me a pair of diamond earrings and a Victoria's Secret gift card. Both politely declined. Gary then got a job with the post office for about a week before getting fired again, and would joke that he would finally be able to get my address. It all ended about the time he moved out. He continued to come in every day just to chat, even though he now lived on the other side of town. Once we got his keys and inspected his apartment, we sent him a pretty big bill for the damages to the apartment and all of his unpaid rent. We were worried he'd come in mad about the charges. Instead, upon receiving the bill, he 100% cut off contact. We still worry about Gary coming back to get his revenge, just considering how unstable he was. Every day that goes by, the odds of that happening hopefully decrease. Thankfully, I don't think he ever did figure out where I live. First time ever posting on Reddit, bear with me. I grew up in Michigan. Typical childhood stuff. Getting into trouble with my brother and our friends. My brother and I shared a mutual friend when we were in grade school named Brandon. He seemed like a normal boy when we first met, though his grandmother and mother were fairly abusive towards him openly, calling him a screw-up and all kinds of names in front of his friends. As we aged, Brandon and my brother fell into drug use, as most typical hooligan kids do. Nothing too special to note. Pot, pills, the norm. And, of course, the abuse towards Brandon had gotten worse, and he had often talked of how much he hated his parents and grandma, as they were always calling the police on him for being high and drunk, and generally being a hooligan as a kid. As we entered high school, I personally had lost touch with Brandon, although my brother hung out with him fairly regularly, and as time passed, Brandon would comment more and more about how his grandma was a bitch and the like. One time while talking to him and my brother, Brandon said, "I wish my grandma would just disappear." The giant cunt would stop being so mean to me then. Further on down our high school years, my brother had mostly lost contact with him, and I had been completely out of the friendship for a couple of years, having no contact whatsoever with him. My brother comes home from hanging out with Brandon one random night and says something to the effect of, "Wow, that kid really hates his grandma." About a month later, as my brother and I are hanging out, we hear from a friend that Brandon had walked into his house, shot his grandma in the head, and then waited for his mom to come home and shot her multiple times as well. He then called a couple of friends and said that he'd finally killed her, and when she was dead, threw the phone at her, screaming, "Call the police now." The people he called to brag called the local police, and the police went and arrested him. When I was 23, I was living in New York City and searching frantically to find a job. I applied to an ad on Craigslist about being a diamond manager's business assistant and helping him on business trips. The ad was a little sketchy, but it said on there he was a family man and the company information was real. I applied and he called me on the phone, and no red flags were raised to me. He asked me to meet him in his office in the Diamond District, which again made sense. When I arrived to the building, I began to feel a little bit uneasy. Every room is on lockdown on the floor he works. He unlocks 3 separate doors to take me to some back office, which is small, and then it locks behind me with some force. I tell myself it's because of the diamonds and their value. He said he was a Jewish man with a lot of religious stuff everywhere and pictures of his family, so I'm relieved. Tells me about a little bit of it even. Then he begins to freak me out. He talks constantly about my nice figure, how most people show up a huge mess, and how ugly most women are who apply for this job. He then tells me I don't wear much jewelry, and he would love to cover me in diamonds and gold. I cut the shit and ask him about the job, to which he immediately asks me if I would be okay sleeping in the same room with him. I say no, and he says I'd have to. I say no, I wouldn't do that. He laughs and says maybe I don't understand. I can tell he's getting angry with me now. He says he's very informal with his insistence and has needs on his trips. Needs that need to be met. I begin to be very blunt and tell him, I will have an employee relationship with you and nothing more. He starts shouting, but I want the sexual relationship. Don't you get that? I realize now that I'm locked inside with this man in a very interior office on the 14th floor of a building. I keep my calm. I don't let him know my fear. I tell him I'd love to hear more about what he is offering, but I really have to go to the bathroom. He escorts me out politely, and wouldn't you know, even the restroom in the main hallway is locked down, but he opens it for me and waits outside. I tell him I'll be right out, no need to wait. To my surprise, he actually leaves. I begin running frantically down the stairwell. He later sent me harassing voicemails, saying he hopes I get ovarian cancer and have to chop everything off. He leaves weird messages where he is just creepily laughing, talking about my demise. He says he knows where to find me. I look him up more and the company is real, but his name and email given to me were obvious fakes. I don't know who he is. He worked for someone, but it wasn't that company because the address of the name didn't add up to where we met. It legit scares me because on a resume, you can see my full name, email, phone, and my address. It's like a stalker starter kit over there. I decide to tell him I have called the cops and given them his number, and luckily the harassing stops. So, I would like to preface this story with a little background. From 2014 to 2016, I served in Guatemala as a missionary of the Mormon Church. Now, there are lots of opinions about Mormons, and everyone is entitled to their own view, of course, but this is not a forum for religious debate or politics, so I will not try to convert you. I do, however, have an encounter I wish to share. Now, we as missionaries talk to everyone, and I am sure that lots of you know, I mean everyone. No matter who you are or what hour of the day, we are sometimes just plain annoying about it. But on rare occasions, people come up and talk to us. I was serving in an area of Guatemala City known for being rough around the edges, and in the middle, and everywhere between. I had been there for about 4.5 months when I received a new companion from Mexico, named Mendez. Our day together went alright. We talked to lots of people, walked all the way around the city, and around 7 o'clock, we were stopping at a tienda, a small store, to buy some water. The instant we stopped at the tienda, we were approached by a man that was completely hammered, who wanted to talk to us and also ask for money. Now, we weren't allowed to give money to drunks, because once word got out, they would never leave us alone, so I bought him some bread, and he gave us his address, and we agreed to meet the next day. It was a long shot, but we decided to meet with him. The next day, he was waiting for us at his house. It was a teeny tiny house made out of corrugated tin and filled with filthy, vicious dogs. The dirt floor was covered in excrement, and the smell was awful, but he was happy to see us and sober, so we talked a bit. His main concern was dropping alcohol, and he wondered if we could help. We helped him set some goals up and agreed to come the next day. It was a great meeting, and he smiled big after we left. The next 6 weeks, we were able to teach him our message and also help him with his drinking. Every meeting, he was smiling and happy to see us. A little too happy now that I think about it. Every time, he was just a little bit more excited to let us in and a little less willing to let us leave. Kind of began to feel a bit nervous around him. Something didn't feel right, although I couldn't put my finger on it. But hey, he wanted us to visit, and so we did. All that changed one Saturday night. We were hosting an activity at our local chapel, and we had invited him along. While we were walking there, we saw him in the street and called out to remind him. He looked at us, smiled, and walked away. We didn't see him at the activity. We didn't see him the next morning at church either, which was weird because he had gone every Sunday since we had started visiting. During lunch, I got a phone call from a payphone. It was him, very obviously drunk and crying, and he said that he needed us at his house. Told him we would be right over, and we were at his house within 10 minutes. When he opened the door, we walked in and sat down. I could faintly smell the alcohol on his breath. He just looked at us and then sat down on his bed. He didn't have a shirt on. It wasn't a little ball on the bed. I noticed a familiar shape under the shirt. It was a gun, with the barrel peeking out. Now, I had been in Guatemala for a year now, so I didn't lose my head. But every sense was now on high alert. I looked at my companion, who had noticed the gun as well, and he calmly asked the man what had happened. He began to tell us about how the night before, instead of going to the activity, he had found a man that he didn't like and killed him. He explained in detail. So much detail that I could see it happening in my mind. He stood up from the bed and went to my companion, using his fingers to act out how he had put 3 bullets into the man's head. He explained to us about how he had killed people since he was a boy, growing up in one of the local gangs. He explained about how he had killed women, children, and the elderly, and about how he couldn't stop doing it. By this time, my mind was swirling. I was figuring out how just about anything in reach could be a weapon. What if he stood up? What if he reached for the gun? I couldn't process it. It was too surreal. But it was happening, and we needed a way out. He began to cry. But a minute afterwards, he looked at us through tearful eyes and said, "You two are the only good friends I have ever had. I want to show you something out behind my house." That was the last straw. Couldn't be here anymore. I knew we had to go. I looked at my companion and suggested to the man that we say a prayer and meet tomorrow. He agreed instantly and knelt down on the floor, using the bed next to him to prop his elbows. I positioned myself next to him directly in front of the gun. I gently but firmly put my hands around his clasped hands as my companion said a short prayer. We slowly backed ourselves to the door and said goodbye to the man. He looked at us as we backed out the door, and when we shut it, I could hear him crying again. We ran up the street to a Mormon family's house and basically ran inside, panting heavily. They asked us what was wrong, and we explained everything. They helped us get to our apartment, and we called our leaders to report the situation. The ending is rather anticlimactic. I left the area a few days later. Mendez stayed and avoided the area for the rest of the time he was in the city. Now, lots of people might be thinking, why didn't you call the police? Well, this is Guatemala. The police don't usually help. We could only avoid him and hope to never meet him again. When I was younger, I met a man. He was my brother's friend, and he started living with us after his parents had done some despicable things, and he was left practically alone and a minor still attending school. Though I can't remember if he was emancipated or supposed to be under someone else's care. I was an annoying little sister then, 7 years younger, but I remember him saying to my brother, "I don't mind at all. She reminds me of mine." What really gets me about this story, this experience, is that I somehow didn't realize until about a month ago how important these events to transpire might be. For me, there are only 2 events that are unmistakably him, things that he did to me. The first one being one night when I was coming down for a glass of water. I began by opening my heavy bedroom door and continued down the creaky hallway and stairs, without it all being silent. Just as I got to the bottom platform, I saw him sitting at the computer. I looked at him, he looked at me, and I heard an old news report playing of the arrest of his parents. I felt like I was invading his most private moment, a time where he was obviously emotional and raw, and I felt horrible. I paused in that moment because it was such an awkward situation. I just wasn't sure how I was supposed to respond to next. But in that moment, where I was in my own head, he must have closed the tab and reopened another. He had to have hit play, as I imagine it wouldn't have started on its own, and I heard moaning. He just stared at me, and I'm now even deeper in my own head, like, is this happening? It must have been an accident. and I finally got the sense in me to go back to my room. I can't remember if I ever told anyone that at the time. I dismissed it as an accident. The second one happened just as I got out of school. I went up to my room to find my bubble back TV was missing. My brother took it all the time, and either as his own perceived punishment or because he wanted to use it for whatever reason. So I started by storming into his room and demanding where it was. The prong in my screw-on cable cord was getting bad, and it was such a hassle to set up again and again. I was aggravated. He tells me he has no idea and he couldn't care less. So confused, I'm now wondering who else would take it. I'm not grounded. My brother doesn't have it. Could it be his friend? I go to his room and I knock. He sounds pissy, and I ask if he took it. Through the door he said he did, and going back to my aggravated state, I opened it up to see it sitting on the ground, seemingly unused. I then angrily say, "Why did you take my TV?" And before I know it, he's bum rushing me into a wall and lifts me higher up it by my throat. I start yelling at him, yelling in general, trying to fight back, and my mom runs up the stairs and screams at him. She tells him to let go of me and get the heck out as my brother comes out of his room with the most puzzled look on his face. Like, what are you doing? His friend then leaves and I can't remember him coming back and living with us after that. A while later, my brother moved to a new house in the same neighborhood, and for years he would on and off allow that friend to stay with him. He felt bad for him, thought he was given an unfair start in life, and wanted to help him. It was before or around this time a man all in black would begin terrorizing me. I've written a story about that on here before, so you might possibly recognize it, but it all started on Hallows Eve when I was in 5th grade. It was exhausting to go through all of this again, truthfully. It was something that apparently my mind tried to downplay, dismiss, and forget for a while. But recently in therapy, I was forced to really face it, to realize it was the origin of who I am today. So I'm going to try to briefly explain what happened without leaving too many details out. There was a knock on the door while I was home alone. It was the middle of the night, and I grew up watching Forensic Files, Law and Order, SVU, etc. So I was just naturally like, oh yeah, I don't want to open this. But like all the dumb characters in horror movies who die in the beginning, I did. I opened the door and nobody was there, so I stepped out onto the porch to look and see if they were leaving because of the moment I had taken to the side, but there was nobody there. At first, I thought nothing of it. One of my brother's friends or something. But sometime later, I was sitting on the couch, and from there, I saw something dark flash past the kitchen window. It was quick, but I kept thinking, you know, it's probably just my brother or his friends playing a prank. Or maybe it's just nothing. I had no idea, but I was definitely creeped out. As I sat there, I just had this feeling of being watched. Like my senses were telling me something was off. But that didn't prepare me for when I looked up. And amidst the slight glow of the backyard, I saw the outline of a man in black standing in the window. In the case of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, I froze. That was when I watched as he lightly knocked on the window and did a close-fingered wave like you would to a child. Then he just disappears. And to summarize what happened when my family came home, it wasn't my brother, and they were more convinced it was a prank. There are more details surrounding these important events and what transpired between them in my previously written story, but what really matters is that it never really stopped after that. Anytime I was home alone or it was late at night, he was there, dressed entirely head to toe in black, so I've never been sure of his age, race, or anything. There were phone calls that started at some point, but they would only be silence or a quick breath. And even though I lived in a house of people, it seemed that it only happened to me. My mom had picked up the silent phone calls, but they or she would hang up quickly, and she assumed nothing of it. Then the next real event happened. I was again home alone. It was a Friday. I remember because my friends were at a school football game that I didn't have a ride for. Around that time, things had kind of slowed down with the man. It seemed like he was coming around and just staring at my house from the backyard far less often. I was actually feeling pretty relaxed at the time, considering everything. I was watching the TV show House, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a dark sudden flash. My stomach dropped, and my heart was pounding like a drum. Everything went quiet. I had muted the TV, and it was almost like a Who Blinks First scenario because whoever or whatever it was making no noise. Forever passed in a series of seconds to minutes, until reality came back with the sound of a doorknob. I heard it jiggling. From deafening silence to hearing the unexpected sound of the figurative pin dropping, my stress response chose correctly for the first time, and I ran, grabbed my phone, left everything else, and went right out the door. I didn't stop until I reached the other side of town. There, I remember lying underneath a streetlight, thinking that this was it, the day it was all building up to. I had been sleeping with a knife under my pillow, being unbelief for years at this point, and it all led to this. It was either an attempt or he wasn't done with me yet. He could be coming at any moment or at his very next opportunity. I took those seconds to try and gather my thoughts and catch my breath. Then I called my mom. She was out at the bar with her boyfriend at the time, so they picked me up and we went back home. Her boyfriend made us stay in the car, and the only thing different than how we left it was that the back door was wide open. It was a complicated antique door, and not easily opened even when it wasn't locked. So that should have been a huge worry in itself, but of course they dismissed that too. They said it must have been the cat. Like, seriously? The most concerning thing for me, though, was that nothing was taken. Most people would naturally first assume it must have been a burglar. But no, nothing was taken. And at the time, there was just a basement full of expensive tools and equipment, as my mom and her boyfriend would flip houses. And yet, not a single thing was gone. There was more than enough time, too. From my leaving the house to coming back had to be about 30 minutes or so. Sometime after that event, my neighbor then experienced something too. While sitting on his patio with his girlfriend, a man in all black started approaching them from the yard of an abandoned house. My neighbor told him to stop, and he didn't. Then he pulled out his gun, said to stop, and still didn't. So my neighbor then fired at the grounds, and in that moment he must have decided it wasn't worth it because he ran off, tripping over a branch on his way out. That was around the time he stopped coming around. But now, as I previously mentioned, therapy has forced me to face this and try to process it. During the time of these events, naturally, I spent so much time wondering who it could be and why. To kidnap me, kill me, do something unspeakable? But I never got any answers from the world, time, or myself, until possibly now. My brother's friend after these events had all transpired, and while sleeping in my brother's car, did something horrifying. He set himself up along a levee. At first, just himself and a notebook, and would watch people as they walked by. They went along with their day unsuspecting, and he would make a record of everyone he saw. Hair color, what they were wearing, race, gender, age range, how long they were there, how often with someone or alone. And then one day, with a knife in hand, he pulled a woman off the levee and into a nearby wooded area. She was able to fight him off. She got away, but not unscathed. He slashed her arm, and I can't even imagine the horror she went through in those moments. Following that, I'm not sure how they found him or how they knew about the notebook, but the only known address they had for him was my brother's and ours. State and local police, as well as, I believe, possibly a U.S. Marshal. It was a branch of law enforcement, I remember being high up and unusual, came to my door in a sudden swarm. They banged on my door, and as I opened it, a cop slammed me against the door with his forearm and told me to stay back. I was absolutely clueless to what was happening, but it started to click when I saw my brother's friend being walked out in handcuffs from my brother's home. They sat him upon the stairs, feet away from police canines, and I could hear them asking where his backpack is. A man said, "If you don't tell us where it is, we're going to search both of these houses." I think he sincerely cared about my brother, as my brother did for him all those years. And so I assume that's why he then divulged that it was under the dining room table at my brother's home. They then went, collected it, and simply left. I don't know what happened to him, but now years later, I wonder if everything that happened to me was because of him. The way he wrote down every movement of those people terrifies me, yet almost solidifies, in a way, my suspicion. What if the only reason he knew when I was truly home alone, our routines, was because he had a notebook on me too? This happened when I was 16. I'm 19 now, female, for what it's worth. I went to a party that some of the older kids from my school were going to. The only reason I went was that I thought it would make me look cool if everybody knew I went to this more adult party. It was the summer, so it's not like I had to worry about school anyways. This one guy there started talking to me and showed me where all the alcohol was so I could get a drink. He said his name was Jason and he was 25. And when I told him that I was 16, he said I looked older than that. Then, my fatal mistake, I had to go to the bathroom. So I asked this guy to hold my drink for me. When I got out, he gave me my drink back, and like an idiot, I finished it really quick. He made me another drink and then followed me around as I made my way around the party. I don't know if it was a few minutes or more like 10 to 15, but I started to feel really sick and dizzy very suddenly. Jason said I should go outside for some fresh air, so I followed him outside. It was honestly hard to think straight, but the rest is kind of a blur. I vaguely remember getting into a car in bits and pieces of the drive, but then I passed out. I woke up in a bed in a room all alone, still feeling pretty woozy, so I just kind of lay there wondering how I got home, or if I was even home at all. When I realized I was not in my own bed, I sat up and realized I wasn't even wearing my own clothes. I was wearing some kind of matching pajama set. The worst part about that is that I wasn't even wearing underwear, which I later learned meant that this creep took all of my clothes off to dress me in this weird pajama outfit. Thankfully, in that moment, I didn't connect those dots, but it wouldn't matter for too long, because eventually Jason came into the room to bring me breakfast. I can only imagine he thought he was being unbelievably generous to me to bring coffee and 2 toasted waffles. I'm not going to go over a detailed retelling of the entire week. Every day was pretty much the same, and quite honestly, I just don't want to. Basically, for an entire week, he made me act like a living doll in his house. He watched me eat and changed my clothes to the outfits he picked out, even using the bathroom. He always put drugs like ecstasy in my drinks, or somehow, to keep me in a positive attitude. It didn't really work though, except for a few hours a day when the drug took effect. And then for seemingly no reason that I can conceive of, he brought me out to his car, put a cloth bag or something over my head, and drove me to some place to drop me off. When I got out of his car, he sped away and I never saw him again. Eventually, I was walking along the side of a road and just collapsed from fatigue. I didn't pass out, just couldn't keep going. Apparently, somebody saw me fall down and called the police, who then found me and brought me to the hospital. Well, the ambulance brought me there, and the police joined me to ask me what the heck was going on. They knew I was missing and they pretty quickly figured out who I was, so they were able to call my parents. Next thing I know, my whole family is there to see me and just thankful that I was alive. I did my best to identify the guy who kidnapped me, and there was a pretty thorough investigation as far as I know, but they never found the guy. He was a total ghost. The police questioned nearly everybody who was at that party and learned the name of the guy who was probably the one to kidnap me, but it wasn't a real name. The phone number anyone had for him was disconnected and only attached to a burner phone anyways. So, yeah, they never caught the guy. It was easily the most traumatic thing to ever happen to me, and I hope it stays that way. But despite that, I know it could have been so much worse. I don't know why he never hurt me or assaulted me, but I'm thankful he did it. I know so many kidnapping victims are treated much, much worse than I was. I was living in Minnesota in a relatively safe town in terms of violent crime. It was the first warmish day of spring that year. I decided to celebrate by riding my bike along a nearby trail that I was very familiar with and is frequently used by others in the warmer months. The trail meanders alongside a few residential areas, parks, and a river. I passed several other outdoor enthusiasts on my trek out, a bit before dusk. After riding a few miles, I decided to head back because it was getting darker. Perhaps I was naive, but I always felt more invincible on my bike than on foot, except when it comes to cars and small children, although the latter are arguably more dangerous because they are less predictable. I was maybe a mile or two from home and went under an overpass. There are 2 lanes on the path, so that trail users have plenty of space to pass in opposite directions. As I'm just going down an incline, just under the overpass, I'm going at least 15 miles per hour. I see 2 men in hoodies and sweatpants round a corner in front of me onto the trail, jogging in cadence. There was nothing outwardly suspicious. They had proper running form, and it was still a bit chilly. At the very last moment before we pass, one of them sticks his arm straight out in front of my chest and strikes hard right underneath my collarbone. As I discovered later, the impact knocked the diamond out of the setting on my necklace and left little spots from bursting the capillaries under the skin. In the few seconds of my fall, I first felt shock and disbelief. It must have been an accident. Then confusion. But why would they stick a rigid arm directly in front of me at that exact moment? Then full-on rage by the time I met concrete. That person did it on purpose. I could have easily broken a bone, shattered something I landed on, and if he had been a few inches higher, he would have injured my throat. Adrenaline rushing, I popped up and started screaming. Are you kidding me, man? They kept on running in the opposite direction, and lucky for me, my survival instincts were redirected to the bike that I had purchased as a birthday gift to myself. I worked hard for it, and it was my lifeline, so of course, I grabbed my non-functional bike and booked it up the hill, constantly looking over my shoulder. Once I started processing what really happened and realized I should value my life over the bike, I stashed it and ran across some railroad tracks, spanning a river to a brightly lit area. In retrospect, I think their intentions were to incapacitate me, enough to carry out more sinister intentions. They probably scoped me out from the overpass on my way out, then waited until they saw me come back, and then struck as we passed, on one of the most obscure parts of the trail. There was a high concrete wall on one side and the river on the other, but we weren't so far removed from civilization that my screams would not be noticed. If they had succeeded in knocking me out, seriously injuring and/or stunning me, I would have been easy to haul away. I'm a petite female. There was a parking lot just above the area they attacked, which would have made a quick getaway. In sum, I think they bolted because I was no longer an inconspicuous target. I don't think they were expecting me to get back up. I doubt they were going to rob me because they could have stopped or come back, and people generally don't carry valuables on a bike ride. Or who knows, maybe they were just some sick weirdos that get their jollies by violently knocking people off bikes. I called my roommate and then the police, who understandably said there really wasn't much they could do because I wasn't able to make out distinct physical features, but they kindly helped retrieve my bike and they even tried to fix it. They said they started getting sexual assault calls from that area once the weather warms up. I ended up with some gnarly bruises on my knee. I also found the dislodged diamond. It fell into my clothing. I honestly don't think I could have had a better outcome though, aside from not being attacked at all. I immediately invested in mace and a taser, and now I'm always on high alert when I'm out, especially by myself, regardless of where I'm at. It took me months to get over the incessant terror that someone may pop out at me, even if I was just walking from my car in the driveway to the door of my house. Getting attacked by total strangers is terrifying. Side note, I think there's validity to the self-defense suggestion of acting crazy when you get attacked. Nobody wants to deal with that stuff, especially if you're in a semi-public or public space. Psychopathic joggers, I hope we never meet again. Also, screw you. I used to work in the housekeeping department of a hospital. We had a rotating door of managers. Our boss at the time, Ryan, a misogynistic man who hated being surrounded by a bunch of women, clearly hired one of his guy friends, Derek, into our department. This wasn't supposed to be allowed, but whatever. It started with Anna, an older Eastern European woman whose husband recently passed away. Derek was hired while Anna was taking a leave of absence to mourn her husband. Derek had earned a reputation for being creepy, and people generally didn't like him because they suspected that he was friends with the boss and assumed that he was essentially spying on his coworkers, so everybody kind of ostracized him. When Anna came back, she took pity on the guy and talked to him. They ate lunch together and made small talk while waiting to clock in or out. All of this information is hearsay. I wasn't told it directly from Anna, but she did later confirm it to me personally. Eventually, Anna stopped talking to Derek because during lunch, he started asking inappropriate questions about her dead husband, like how much money she received from his pension and life insurance. She also claimed that she was pretty sure he followed her home from work several times, which she reported to our manager, but he brushed it off as her being paranoid. he told her she just misinterpreted Derek's curiosity and was overreacting. After that, a bunch of girls came forward and started saying how Derek was being creepy with them. I don't remember the specifics, but all of their accusations were also brushed under the rug as it being popular. I don't know if that's the right word. To hate on this guy, Derek. I worked in an obscure area completely alone. I was on a weird shift that was still considered second shift, but I went in and left later than everyone else. So I didn't really associate with many people except on weekends, where I was the second shift supervisor and came in at a normal time because my area was closed on weekends and I had to do detail work and all that extra stuff that came with being a supervisor. Derek was still new, so he worked all over the place and didn't have a set weekend, so sometimes he would be on my weekend, and sometimes I would see him on my second break. I was nice to him because I felt bad that everyone hated him. At this point, I hadn't heard about him following Anna home, and I'd only heard that he was kind of creepy and thought a lot of his behavior was just poor social skills. My son and two of my nephews are on the autism spectrum and have horrible social skills and struggle to make friends, but are honestly some of the coolest people I know. Because of my personal experience with them, I actually made an effort to be nice to this guy. But that was a mistake. After I finally found out about Anna's experience with this guy, I started paying attention to my surroundings when leaving the hospital at night. It took a while before we worked together again, but when we did, he definitely followed me home. I pulled into a gas station and he parked on the side of the building, kind of out of my sight, and watched me pump my gas into my car. When I peeked around my car and made eye contact with him, he sped so fast out of the parking lot his tires squealed. I went to the assistant manager and told her about my experience. I didn't have to work with Derek again for a long time, but I think I pissed off my boss Ryan with my story because after that, it felt like he had it out for me and was doing things specifically to make me want to quit. The final straw was when he switched my weekend to the opposite weekend, which was notoriously terrible, and was now Derek's set weekend. I only worked that weekend one time, and it was one of the worst days in my entire experience working at that hospital, which says something because I had really terrible experiences there. When I left that night, Derek pulled out right in front of me. I know it was him because I saw him in the car as he pulled in front of me, and this might sound weird, but it felt like he was trying to follow me while he was in front of me. Like he would wait until my turn signal was on before he put his on. I pulled into a Taco Bell drive-thru instead of turning right at the corner, and that seemed to lose him, but it really freaked me out. After that night, I quit and never went back. I have no clue what happened to that guy after I left. This happened last week. I live alone in a small college town. Although I'm not a student or a faculty member, my apartment is in a duplex on a residential street just a few blocks from campus, which most of the students have left for their winter break. Things got very quiet when they are not around. Late Wednesday night, I woke up to a disturbing sound outside. It was somebody crying, but not in a normal way. This was more like delirious wailing. The person didn't sound grief-stricken or panicked, and there were no cries for help. Otherwise, I'd probably have gone outside, cautiously, to check things out. This sounded more like someone doing an impression of a ghost, but being a little bit too convincing. Sort of, woo, ah, over and over. Not a pleasant way to wake up. I got up and looked out the window, but didn't see anyone. I couldn't tell where the sound was coming from. After a few minutes, the wailing grew distant and things got quiet again. I went back to sleep, a little unsettled. Thursday night rolled around and I went to bed as usual, wondering if I'd hear anything again. Surely enough, I was awakened a few hours later. By this time, the sound was completely different. At first, I wondered if there had been a heavy snowfall because I heard what sounded like the edge of a shovel scraping the sidewalk. It was very rhythmic. 2 plodding footsteps followed by a long and drawn-out scraping. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. I got up and looked out the window. There, I saw no snow but a dense fog, and a woman across the street. It took me a minute to tell if she was wearing some strange hat, but then I realized that the hat was her hair. It was long, down to her waist, and completely filthy and matted up. bunched up into a single mass that looked like a gigantic glistening hairball. The woman was standing with her shoulders hunched forward and her arms crossed behind her back, like a figure skater or dancer. She was doing an unusual sort of dance where she would take 2 heavy stomps and then glide as if she were on ice skates, but there was no ice. I couldn't tell how she was gliding so elegantly and effortlessly across the pavement. It was almost hypnotic to watch because she appeared to be elderly and frail, but she could spin, glide, and maintain balance on a level that would be hard for me to keep up with. Each time she would glide, I'd hear the scrape sound of her shoe against the pavement. There were no additional steps to the dance, just the rhythmic stomp stomp glide, headed in one direction before twirling around and doing the same steps in the other. After a few minutes, she stopped and then stooped down like a runner at the starting line, dramatically leaning forward with her fingertips lightly touching the ground. She stayed that way for a good minute or two. It was a very unsettling thing to see in the shadows and fog. Then she slowly stood up, turned facing away from me, and got up on her very tiptoes with her long skinny arms outstretched. Then she broke into that rapid tiptoeing motion that professional ballerinas do. In my mind, I heard that classic cartoon sound effect that plays when a character scampers away. Without a sound, she danced into the fog. I haven't seen or heard anything from her since.